From the very start of Liddy's story, the narrator explains that adventurers always carried old luggage from town, everything from everyday items to precious treasures. While essential for their journey, these items became a burden in battle. Therefore, a porter was an indispensable member of the party. They didn't fight and had no combat skills. Their only job was to carry the team's belongings throughout the entire adventure. To some, porters were unsung heroes, but to others they were merely obscure figures in the background. Such is the life of a porter. Of course, even the hero's party in our story had a porter of their own. The opening scene is an intense battle. The hero, Rozark, shouts at the Demon King, declaring that this will be his end and that they will defeat him for good. After the Demon King was defeated, Liddy joyfully exclaimed that Rozark had done it. Rozark smiled, responding with a firm nod and thanking Liddy for sticking with them until the very end. Liddy said softly that working with everyone was the greatest honor of his life. Liddy then named the rest of the party members: Ignore the Mage, Demoness the Warrior, and Farah the Priestess. Liddy recounted that despite facing seemingly insurmountable hardships, the team had combined their unique strengths to defeat the Demon King. Although Liddy admitted he hadn't contributed anything to the fight, he still congratulated the team on their glorious victory. Demoness then spoke up, telling Liddy not to sell himself short, emphasizing that it was thanks to him that the party was able to give their all against the Demon King. Rozark agreed with Demoness, adding that everything they'd achieved would have been impossible without Liddy. The whole team fought together and defeated the Demon King. Hearing their words, Liddy was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. Seeing this, Rozark asked in surprise if Liddy was injured. Liddy shook his head, explaining that he'd just realized how incredibly lucky he was to have met and journeyed with them. He explained that 5 years ago, he was just a war orphan, but they had taken him in and accepted him as the party's porter. Liddy thanked the team once more, saying he felt truly fortunate to have worked with them. Ignore smiled and said the feeling was mutual. Demoness nodded in agreement with Ignore, and Farah added that Liddy's presence in the group was a blessing to them all. As the group returned together, Rozark asked what everyone would do next, now that the Demon King was defeated. He then suggested they share their plans, just for old time's sake. Ignore answered that she planned to return to her forest, as the experiences she'd gathered on their journey would surely inspire a new breakthrough in her research. Demoness shared that perhaps one day Rozark would find him escorting important people on the road, since many would want protection from a hero's companion. Farah said she would return to the Grand Cathedral because no matter their journey, she was and always would be a devoted servant of her faith. Just then, Rozark grinned and said he bet the team was curious where the hero was heading next. Ignore immediately snapped at him to shut up, asking if Rozark remembered how many times he'd already told them. But despite her nagging, Rozark declared that he was heading to the royal capital, because he had promised to marry the princess as soon as the mission was over. That was the whole reason he'd accepted this dangerous journey in the first place. Rozark continued, his voice dripping with smugness, boasting that not only was the princess stunningly beautiful, but he couldn't wait to find out what she was like in bed. Ignore couldn't help but retort that Rozark was as crude as ever. Farah added that Rozark would be the ideal partner for any young woman, if not for that personality of his. Rozark then turned to Liddy and asked if he wanted to come with him to the royal capital, promising him the honor of becoming the future king's first retainer. Liddy first thanked Rozark for the offer, but then declined, saying he'd made up his mind long ago. He wanted to become an adventurer. Hearing this, the entire party was visibly stunned. Ignore asked, her voice filled with surprise, if Liddy was really sure about this. Demoness, looking tense, urged Liddy not to say he was planning to go alone. Liddy smiled and confirmed that he did, in fact, intend to start his journey as a solo adventurer. He further explained that he understood it was a long road ahead, but his goal was to one day be able to stand as their equal. Demoness replied that he understood the decision, while admitting it would be an incredibly difficult journey. Farah added that it was an honor for Liddy to think so highly of them. Ignore, however, reacted strongly, saying loudly that they had to stop him. Demoness immediately objected, asking how they could be cruel enough to crush his dream. Farah, while agreeing it was cruel, insisted they couldn't let Liddy go through with it. Ignore shared that Liddy had absolutely no aptitude for being an adventurer. She explained that she had tried her absolute best to teach him magic, but to this day, Liddy couldn't even light a single match. Demoness also admitted that he had spent a great deal of time instructing Liddy in basic combat skills, but all his efforts were in vain. Liddy couldn't even use a simple dagger for self-defense. However, Farah cheerfully pointed out that Liddy had mastered social etiquette and the art of fine dining, which had to count for something, right? Even so, he still couldn't cast a single basic spell. Ignore expressed her opinion that Liddy had zero talent for anything combat-related, and that becoming an adventurer was the worst possible choice for him. She asked the group who was going to be the one to tell Liddy the bitter truth. Farah immediately refused, saying she couldn't do it, as she couldn't imagine putting Liddy through that kind of pain. Demoness yelled at the two women not to look his way, as they couldn't possibly expect an old man like him to break his own grandson's heart. But Ignore cut in, insisting that Demoness was the perfect person for the role. She told him to think about it. A soft-hearted grandfather having to speak the harsh truth of reality to protect his grandson from danger. Ignore went on to ask Demoness if he thought he was doing the right thing, stressing that the role had to be his, as he had lived longer and had more experience than she did. But to everyone's surprise, Rozark suddenly cut in, asking what the hell they were all arguing about. He said bluntly that if Liddy wanted to go down that path, then they should just let him do what he wants. The group was stunned and asked if Rozark was serious. Ignore yelled, criticizing how he could say something so irresponsible, and asked if he felt any shame. Farah added that it was too dangerous, while Demoness expressed that he thought at least one of them should go along to look after Liddy. Rozark shook his head, telling them they should reconsider. He pointed out that Liddy had grown up and it was time for him to leave the nest. Then, Rozark turned to ask Liddy if he was sure about his decision. Liddy replied that he had decided, but only if Rozark agreed. Rozark smiled and confirmed, saying that Liddy had his blessing. However, he added that he would only allow Liddy to become an adventurer on one condition, a condition he was sure Liddy would have no trouble fulfilling. Rozark patted Liddy's head, saying he had seen him do it once before, and he bet that he could overcome it by himself this time too. Rozark asked Liddy again for his decision, reminding him that a real man never goes back on his word. Liddy thought for a moment and then replied that he would do it, because he planned to one day catch up to Rozark and become the world's greatest adventurer. In the end, the whole group agreed to let Rozark lead and to move forward together. Afterward, Liddy thought to himself that it was time to start his own adventure. The 5 years he'd spent traveling with the Heroes Party were the best time of his life. All that time, he could only admire them from afar, always being sheltered and protected. But now, things would be different. He was going to become a real adventurer. Liddy felt a rush of excitement, seeing this as the start of the adventuring career he had always dreamed of. But just as he took his first step, a voice rang out, yelling for Liddy to stop. Liddy tensed up, turned around, and asked if they needed something from him. Seeing them, Liddy asked in surprise who they were, since he didn't think he had ever met them before. The group began to laugh and mock Liddy, asking if he thought he was trying to act cool, and if he really thought he could just walk away scot-free. A girl in the group shouted, telling him he wasn't getting away, and asked if he was a porter. Liddy replied that he was and asked why they wanted to know. The girl continued, saying she noticed he wasn't with anyone despite being a porter, which meant there was no one nearby to guard the haul he brought back from the mountains. She angrily demanded that Liddy hand over all the treasure, promising she would let him go without hurting him. Seeing them act this way, Liddy asked them to hold on, saying they sounded a lot like bandits. Hearing that, the girl asked if he'd really only just realized that. She then told him to hurry up and comply if he didn't want to get hurt. Liddy looked shocked as he realized they were robbers. He began to circle them, saying that they really were bandits, and that it had probably been years since he'd run into a group like this. Liddy shared that his party had become so famous that partway through their journey, people just stopped coming after them. The bandit girl confusedly asked what he was talking about. Liddy then said that this made him realize he was truly starting his own adventure. He apologized for forgetting about that and asked if they needed something from him. The bandit girl shouted in anger, saying Liddy had some nerve, but if he thought they wouldn't touch him just because he was young, he was dead wrong. She told him to forget it and lunged at Liddy to attack. The scene shifts back to Rozark and his comrades. Ignore said she couldn't help but worry about Liddy and wondered if he would really be okay. Rozark told her not to worry so much, but Ignore angrily snapped, asking how he could possibly say that. Demoness added that Liddy was, after all, just a porter. Farah said that Liddy had no real combat or magic skills, and she was worried something terrible might happen if some thugs targeted him. Hearing all of this, Rozark burst out laughing and said that they had really lost touch with the real world during their journey. Demoness asked confusedly what he meant by that. Rozark again asked everyone to trust him, because Liddy would be fine. Ignore shouted angrily, demanding Rozark explain where all his confidence was coming from. Rozark urged Ignore to calm down, insisting that he wasn't just spouting nonsense because he knew for a fact that Liddy would be all right. Meanwhile, he started to describe Liddy, and at the same time, a parallel scene was unfolding elsewhere. Rozark said that it was true Liddy was a porter and had no real fighting ability, but what everyone was forgetting was that Liddy was the hero's porter. At the same time, on the other side, Liddy was attacked by the bandits, but to everyone's surprise, he effortlessly dodged the blow. Rozark continued, saying that a porter's #1 job is to ensure the party's items don't get damaged during a fight, and Liddy had done that perfectly throughout their entire journey. Rozark asked if they had forgotten that they had once faced the Demon King and his entire army. He reminded everyone that even though Liddy didn't fight directly, it didn't mean he wasn't dealing with collateral damage. The Demon King's army rained tens of thousands of arrows on them at one point, and then there was the time they fought a dragon that leveled the surrounding landscape with its breath. Yet Liddy had kept all of the party's equipment completely safe through all those battles. In fact, it was that very skill that allowed Liddy to so easily dodge the bandit girl's attacks. The confused bandit girl asked what was happening, not understanding why none of her attacks were hitting Liddy. Liddy, getting stressed, told them to stop and said he needed to get going. In reality, it was all thanks to Liddy's support skill called Evasion, which was now at level 79. Liddy once again reminded them that robbery is a crime, and they should stop immediately. While Liddy was talking, a bald bandit lunged at him from behind. But by the time Liddy turned around, it was too late. He was hit. The scene cuts back to the hero party, where Farah asked what would happen if Liddy couldn't dodge an enemy attack. Rozark replied that nobody's perfect, and everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Liddy might slip up once, and something could hit the party's cargo that he couldn't dodge in time. But when that happens, Liddy will use his own body as a shield. In fact, Liddy has a skill called Endurance at level 85. So when the bald bandit hit him with a club, the club shattered. The tense bald bandit asked, What the hell just happened? Liddy apologized for the broken club, and the bald bandit was even more shocked to see that Liddy was completely unharmed. Liddy then asked the two bandits if they understood that doing bad things would get them nowhere in life. He advised them to stop robbing innocent travelers. Both bandits seemed a bit bewildered by Liddy's words. Liddy then pulled out a knife and said that if they continued with their plan, he would have to teach them a lesson. The bald bandit tensed up. But just then, Liddy accidentally cut his own finger because his combat skill was only at level 0, and he realized that using a knife was still too difficult for him. So, for now, he figured he needed to do something scary enough to make the bandits give up being robbers for good. Suddenly, Liddy remembered something. The scene cuts back to the hero party, where Demoness asked about the times Liddy had to defeat enemies. He pointed out that you can't just defend and expect to get out of every confrontation unscathed. Rozark asked if they were serious, saying that was the last thing they needed to worry about. He explained that a porter's job is to carry the group's goods, not to fight. Rozark continued, saying they had defeated golems and killed dragons, and since most of their body parts were valuable, they always tried to bring back as much as possible. Rozark asked the group again, who was the one able to carry those boulders and even the entire dragon on his back? He added that it was Liddy, and as far as they knew, he was probably the #1 weightlifter in the world. When the scene cut back to Liddy, the bandits were completely stunned by something. They were astounded because Liddy had just effortlessly lifted a giant boulder the size of a house. This was thanks to his support skill called Backpacker, which was at level 99. The bandits, in disbelief, asked him who on earth he was. Liddy smiled and calmly replied that he was the porter for the hero's party. Hearing this, the bandits were both stunned and terrified, and they begged Liddy to spare them. Without hesitation, they started to run away. Just then, Liddy yelled, demanding they swear to never rob innocent travelers again. Once the bandits had fled, Liddy smiled and set the boulder back on the ground. The scene cuts back to Rozark, who said that while Liddy didn't fight directly in the battles against the Demon King's army, they shouldn't be mistaken. Liddy was incredibly strong. It's like how a hero becomes the world's greatest adventurer. Being a porter for heroes made Liddy the world's strongest porter. Rozark added that from now on, it was time for Liddy to start his own adventure, and he couldn't be more excited to see him succeed. The scene shifts to the next day in the Casimir Kingdom, specifically the provincial city of Thikar. This was one of the human towns located near the Demon King's castle, serving as the first line of defense against any monster invasions. Despite its proximity to monster territory, the city had never let a single monster cross its borders, and it had stood strong as a fortress against the Demon King's army for the past 10 years. When Liddy arrived in the kingdom, he was incredibly surprised to see that everyone seemed to be holding a huge party in the city. He figured that news of the hero's victory over the Demon King must have reached the people here. This was likely thanks to Farah's magic. Her messengers had spread the word everywhere, and the news of their victory spread like wildfire. As the news reached the farthest corners of the world, this could truly be an era of peace. In the kingdom, children were running, playing, and cheering that they were the heroes. This sight made Liddy feel incredibly happy, because they had truly brought peace to everyone. Liddy wondered if he could ever hope to achieve something like they did. However, he remembered Rozark's words about becoming the world's greatest adventurer, so he decided it was time to take the first step. And this very town would be where his journey as an adventurer began. The scene shifts to some time later, at the Thikar Adventurers Guild, where Liddy asked in surprise why the guild couldn't accept his registration. The receptionist replied, asking if Liddy really needed to ask. The fact was, Liddy's archery skill was 0. Your swordsmanship skill is also a 0. And even your magic skill is a 0. The receptionist explained that he hadn't passed any of the 3 required basic exams. She added that the life of an adventurer was dangerous, and Liddy would be in grave danger if he went out like this. Hearing these words, Liddy was completely shocked and exclaimed that it couldn't be true. Suddenly, he remembered that he had a letter of recommendation in his pocket. To be honest, Liddy hadn't wanted to use it, but now he had no other choice since he couldn't afford to fail before even stepping out the door. The receptionist was getting tired of the situation, but she still had to look over the letter. When she opened the letter, the receptionist was astonished to see the signatures of Rozark the hero, Ignor the sage, Demoness the warrior, and Farah the priest. She asked Liddy in surprise who on earth he was. Liddy was about to answer, but before he could say anything, the receptionist shrieked, asking if he had forged the letter. Liddy tensely replied that he hadn't. Just then, another voice rang out, telling the receptionist not to jump to conclusions. When the receptionist looked toward the voice, she saw it was Guildmaster Zornius. He asked her to let him see the letter. The receptionist handed it over, still insisting that it was a fake. After reading the letter, Zornius asked the receptionist if she remembered what the hero had told him when he once visited the city. The scene shifts to Zornius talking with Rozark, where Zornius tells Rozark that if there was anything he needed from the guild, he should let them know, and they would spare no expense to support him in the fight against the Demon King. The Adventurers Guild is the only organization founded with the goal of eliminating the threat of monsters. Their mission and their very reason for existing is to support Rozark under any circumstances. Rozark turned his head, smiled, and asked Zornius if that was his only reason. He continued, saying that being an adventurer isn't just a journey to destroy enemies, but a ceaseless exploration that makes his heart pound with every step. Even though he knew he shouldn't say it, especially when the whole world was waiting for them, Rozark couldn't hide the joy he found in every adventure. Even if there was no Demon King threatening the world, who said they had to stop adventuring just because peace had returned? That's why, someday when that time comes, everyone will need Zornius and the guild's help. Rozark added that after defeating the Demon King and bringing peace to the land, he hoped Zornius and the guild would nurture true adventurers. The scene shifts back to the present, where Zornius tells Liddy and the receptionist that it's only been a few days since the Demon King was defeated, and things are just starting to stabilize. Zornius continued, saying that it might still be too early to say for sure that the world was completely free from external threats. But he could be certain that the hero, Sir Rozark, wished for a world where anyone could become an adventurer. And he shared that wish. Zornius then announced to Liddy that he was personally approving his registration. Liddy would start at rank F, the lowest in the guild. Zornius also reminded him that he expected Liddy not to let him down. Liddy joyfully replied, promising to do his best and thanking the guildmaster. Afterwards, Liddy began to celebrate while Zornius headed inside. However, the receptionist hurried after Zornius with more questions. She asked Zornius if he was really going to let the boy risk his life like that. Zornius replied that no, that wasn't how it was going to be, adding that the boy was not a child anymore. The receptionist was stunned to hear this. While Zornius had high hopes for Liddy, as he knew the boy had once been a young porter for the hero's party. The scene shifts to some time later, with Liddy looking at the quest he had received. His first quest was a delivery to the next town before sunrise. After reading it, Liddy was thrilled because this was an easy job for him. It was no different from his work as a porter, but this was his important first step on the path to becoming an adventurer, so he couldn't mess it up. Liddy shouted, resolving that he would get this package to its destination safely, or he'd never become a true adventurer. He stood up and hoisted the crate onto his back, but just as he lifted it, he heard someone cry out. Startled, Liddy put the box down and opened it to see what was inside. He was surprised to find a girl and a baby dragon inside. He realized that the cargo he was supposed to deliver was actually the girl. The girl told Liddy not to mind her, saying she was just an item to be delivered. Liddy was stunned to see an item that could talk. He replied that he didn't believe her, saying she was trying to smuggle herself out of town by filing a delivery request. Hearing this, the girl's expression changed, and she did not look pleased at all. Liddy then told the girl she couldn't do that, as the guild has different procedures for escort and delivery quests. He told her to go back and submit the proper request. The girl was silent for a moment. Liddy whispered that he was quite surprised by how calm she was. He asked her how she could be so composed, noting that even though the dragon was small, it was still a dragon. Liddy thought about how rare dragons were in this region, and remembered fighting dragons that had flocked from all over, so he'd gotten used to the idea of them existing. The girl then spoke up, feigning that he must be a seasoned adventurer to remain so calm in this situation. If that was the case, she wanted to make a direct request. She knew it was a big ask, but could he please help her get to her destination? She put on a pitiful face and begged for Liddy's help. Liddy replied that this was against regulations. But suddenly, to his surprise, the girl saw something and hurriedly hid inside the box. Liddy, confused, asked why the girl was hiding in the box and what was going on. Just then, a boy named Raka called out to Liddy, asking if he had seen a little girl pass by, carrying a small dragon. Liddy asked Raka what he planned to do with the girl if he found her, and whether she was related to him. At that moment, a deep voice from Raka cut Liddy off, telling him not to bother and to just answer what Raka asked. Raka told Raka to let him do the talking. Then, Raka explained to Liddy that the girl was a nobleman, and they had been tasked with bringing her back unharmed. Raka leaned in close to Liddy and said in a soft voice that he would ask one last time, had he seen the girl with the dragon in this neighborhood? Hearing this, the girl in the box began to tremble violently. At that moment, Liddy remembered a question he had once asked Rozark about how to decide whether to help someone. Rozark smiled and asked if he really needed to ask that question. Then, Rozark said with confidence that a true adventurer always sides with the righteous girls. In that moment, Ignore yelled, jokingly telling Rozark to stop teaching Liddy bad things. The scene shifts back to the present, where Liddy informs everyone that he hasn't seen any girl. Roka asked if that was true. Liddy then lifted the box onto his shoulder and said he had to go, apologizing for not being able to help. Roka suddenly asked Liddy about the things he was carrying in the box. Liddy replied that it was just some goods he needed to deliver. Roka asked Liddy again how much he was asking for the goods, as he was willing to buy them. Liddy replied that he was delivering it as part of a quest, so it wasn't necessary. Roka asked again if Liddy understood what he was saying. Liddy, a bit confused, replied that he was pretty sure he understood. Roka angrily shouted that Liddy didn't understand, and demanded that he hand over the box immediately, or else Liddy would face severe consequences. Roka lunged at Liddy with a punch, but Liddy easily dodged it, causing Roka to slam into the wall. Roka cried out in pain from the hard impact with the wall, and Liddy quickly asked if he was okay. Roka screamed that Liddy had broken his arm. His anger flaring, Roka ordered his companions to kill Liddy immediately. But before anyone could act, Liddy had already dashed off. Everyone tried to attack, but Liddy easily avoided every blow. The men roared in frustration, wondering why they couldn't hit this boy, and questioned who this kid was. As Liddy started to run away, Roka yelled, ordering everyone to chase after him and not let that brat escape. However, by the time Roka finished speaking, Liddy had already run a considerable distance. Everyone was stunned, realizing that Liddy was no ordinary child. Roka quickly dismissed everyone's concerns, saying there was nothing to worry about. Liddy was just a kid, and they needed to catch up to him. When Liddy reached the end of the alley, he saw a group of soldiers blocking the way. Realizing he had to turn back, he was surprised to see Roka and his henchmen approaching from behind. Roka laughed loudly, saying that the entire city was surrounded by walls, and asked Liddy if he really thought he could sneak out through the gates that were locked at night. Roka taunted Liddy, saying he had nowhere to go now. Then he yelled, demanding that Liddy pay the price for breaking his arm, and promised to break every single bone in his body. Hearing this, Liddy thought to himself that Roka had done it to himself. He also thought that he could run back to the guild, but it would exceed the time limit for the quest. Liddy didn't want to cause trouble for the other adventurers, so he needed to find another way out. Suddenly, Liddy looked up at the wall, then gently tapped on the box. The girl in the box peeked her head out a little, telling Liddy that he could just hand her over to them. In fact, she insisted that they couldn't be put in any more danger. Liddy told her to be quiet and keep her head down for a moment. The girl looked at him, her face full of confusion. Liddy reassured her, telling her not to worry, saying he would never let them have her. Liddy smiled, adding that she was his precious cargo, and keeping his deliveries safe was the one thing he was good at. The girl stared at Liddy for a moment, a hint of surprise on her face, unable to look away from him. Meanwhile, Raka and his henchmen were closing in on Liddy, ready to attack. Without a moment's hesitation, Liddy picked up the box and used his throw skill level 66, launching it over the wall. Everyone was stunned, wondering what the hell Liddy was doing and how he could throw something so far. They wondered if he was planning to take the girl down with him. As everyone's attention was fixed on the box, Liddy activated his sprint skill, level 72, and dashed towards the city gate, weaving through the dumbfounded crowd. The crowd was shocked by Liddy's speed, but they soon realized what was happening, wondering if he was actually going to break through the gate to escape. Outside the city gate, the guards stared at the box in confusion, having no idea what it was. Just then, Liddy burst through, smashing the city gate as he fled. He shouted an apology to the guards as he zipped past them. Even the guards couldn't get a clear look, left only with their confusion at what had just happened. Suddenly, the girl in the small dragon tumbled out of the box. As she realized she was falling, she screamed in terror. To her surprise, Liddy was right there to catch her in his arms. Liddy asked if she was okay, apologizing and asking if she was hurt. The girl replied that she was fine, just a little startled. Liddy then caught the box, placed the girl back inside and slung it over his shoulder. Liddy said it was time to go before their pursuers caught up. The girl apologized to Liddy, saying her selfish actions had put him in such a dangerous situation. Liddy replied that it was fine, that she didn't need to feel guilty because it was his job to deliver her where she needed to go. He told her to just sit tight. The girl then asked Liddy if they were heading to the next town. Liddy said yes, explaining that it would be their first stop. The girl said that after the next town, they would continue south to Myrick, then to Hansville, Iltonia, and finally, Fenalicia. The girl asked Liddy if he could take her all the way to the kingdom of Fenalicia. Hearing this, Liddy was stunned and exclaimed, "Fenalicia?" The girl replied that she understood it was a huge request, but he was her only hope. She had no one else to trust but him. She begged for Liddy's help, insisting that she had to return to Fenalicia immediately and promised to compensate him handsomely for the job. Liddy asked her curiously why she was in such a hurry to get to Fenalicia. He added that Fenalicia was at the southern tip of the continent, the farthest kingdom from the border, and that the journey wouldn't be easy, not even for him. So he wanted to hear her reason first. The girl calmly replied that she was the princess of Fenalicia. Liddy, who at first thought that seemed plausible, suddenly realized what she'd just said and shouted in astonishment, "A princess?" The girl smiled and introduced herself, saying her name was Veronica Fenalicia and that she was the first princess of the kingdom of Fenalicia. After traveling a bit further, Liddy stopped by a large tree and told Veronica that he didn't think the thugs could find them here, so they should set up camp and rest for a day. Veronica apologized to Liddy for everything that had happened, saying she felt terrible for putting him in danger because of her. Liddy laughed and told her not to worry because he was just doing his job as a pseudo-adventurer. Suddenly, the dragon spoke up, telling Veronica that as a noble, she must act the part. The power of one's character, it said, is the ultimate and most powerful weapon of a royal. The dragon even advised Veronica to speak with more confidence. It then approached Liddy and asked if this was the first time he'd ever heard a dragon speak. The question seemed reasonable, as not everyone gets the chance to meet a legendary dragon. The dragon then told Liddy to cover his ears tightly because it was about to tell a story. But before it could speak, Liddy asked if it was a dragon of the Lexi species. The dragon was stunned, asking Liddy what he knew about its kind. Veronica then shared that for the past 5 years she had been studying at the Casimir Academy of Magic. She joined the academy because Casimir was at the forefront of magical research, despite being located near the Demon Lord's territory. However, she couldn't stay any longer, especially after what happened last year. Veronica explained that the king of Fenalicia, her father, was assassinated by an unknown assailant. Hearing this, Liddy was shocked and asked why the king was killed. Veronica replied that this truth had been kept secret throughout the war, as they didn't want to cause panic while dealing with the monsters. However, the dragon, named Yido, interrupted and said that now was the time to reveal the truth and for the rightful king to take the throne. But, Yido added, it wasn't that simple. The dragon then asked Liddy if he understood what it was saying. Liddy replied that someone was trying to stop Veronica from returning to the kingdom, but he wondered who would do such a thing. Liddy also mentioned a good reason to believe it was the second princess, Flora. She's Veronica's half-sister. Yido yelled that if Veronica wasn't around, Flora would be the one to inherit the throne. The goblin bet that Flora was involved in the king's assassination. However, Veronica stopped Yido, saying that couldn't be true as Flora was an incredibly kind person. She believed Flora would never plot to kill her own father just for the throne. Veronica also shared that right now she just wanted to find out what was really happening in the palace. She needed to know who was causing all this chaos and why. If Flora was being manipulated and working with the culprit, that would mean Flora was also in danger. So, Veronica once again asked Liddy if he could take her back to the kingdom. Liddy smiled and replied that, of course, Veronica could count on him. Yido was surprised to see that Liddy didn't hesitate at all, not even for a second. Yido asked Veronica if she was sure about Liddy, as he suspected Liddy might be trying to sell them to traffickers. Veronica replied that she thought Yido was being too rude to Liddy and they should at least trust him. Yido approached Liddy again, his face tense, and asked if he was truly ready for this journey. He acknowledged that Veronica would pay him a handsome reward when it was over, but also warned that the journey would be anything but easy. Liddy replied that he knew, but he still wanted to help, because that's what a hero would do in his position. Hearing this, Veronica was a bit confused, wondering why Liddy was talking about a hero. Liddy continued saying that besides, it's not every day you get to work with a princess on your first quest as a newbie, and he truly appreciated the opportunity she had given him. Veronica was overjoyed to hear that, but suddenly Yido realized something and urgently yelled for Liddy to stop, asking if he was really a newbie. Yido shouted at Veronica, insisting it wouldn't be okay because Liddy was a complete rookie. Veronica replied that she'd seen Liddy outrun all their pursuers while carrying them, so she was confident they'd be fine. Liddy also said he would do his best. The scene shifts to Raka and his henchmen, where Raka is furious that they lost Liddy so easily. One of Raka's men asked if he thought Liddy and the girl had gone far and might have set up camp nearby. He asked if Raka wanted him to assemble a pursuit team. Raka said no, stating there was no point anymore as their fates were sealed the moment they left the car. Zanamund was already targeting them. Hearing this, the henchman was surprised, asking if Raka was talking about the legendary assassin. Raka replied, yes, he was talking about the noble assassin, Zanamund. He also shared that Zanamund has a perfect kill rate, with no one surviving to tell the tale. He warned that it was best to stay away from the assassin, unless someone wanted to know what it feels like to breathe through a slit throat. Hearing this, all the henchmen were terrified and fell silent, not daring to say a word. Finally, Raka told them to go home. The henchmen were also upset because they weren't getting paid for what they'd done. The scene shifts back to Liddy and Veronica, who are both asleep. Suddenly, Liddy sensed something and woke up. Seeing Liddy wake up so abruptly, a nervous Veronica asked what was wrong. Liddy replied that someone was approaching them. Veronica tensed up and asked if it was their pursuers. Liddy shared that, from the sound of it, there seemed to be only one person. Liddy could tell this thanks to his hearing skill, which was at level 68. Right now, he could sense that the person was observing them from quite a distance. This person's skills were far superior to the henchmen who had chased them in Thikar, so Liddy thought they weren't in immediate danger. At this distance, the person would probably attack Veronica sooner or later, so Liddy decided to wait for them to make the first move. After they dealt with the first wave of attack, they would run for it. But before he could think any further, a magical cord shot towards Liddy and tied him up. By the time he realized he was the target, it was too late for Liddy to understand what was happening. Seeing this, both Veronica and Yido were in shock. Liddy felt tense as he hadn't expected this at all. He thought the other person would aim for Veronica directly. In fact, monsters and beasts usually target humans and ignore auxiliary members of the party, including the porter, and Liddy had never been targeted during any of his adventures. But this time they weren't up against a monster and he was no longer a porter. This was normal when fighting human enemies, to target the support or those in the back before attacking the main target. Liddy cursed himself for being so stupid, and realized this was what it felt like to fight as a real adventurer. Just then, Xanamund emerged from the forest, saying the ambush had gone more smoothly than he'd expected. He also shared that his intuition had warned him Liddy was highly capable, but it seemed he was wrong. His instincts weren't as sharp as they used to be. Yido anxiously urged Liddy to get up and demanded the assassin introduce himself. Xanamund replied that it was an honor to meet them, and introduced himself as Xanamund from the house of Erdish Barony. Xanamund also apologized for obstructing their journey, but he insisted that Veronica had been marked for death. Xanamund declared that he would be taking her life. Yido immediately jumped in to protect Veronica, launching an attack with a wave of ice. But Xanamund remarked that Yido certainly had an interesting acquaintance. He easily dodged the attack and countered with one of his own, lightly injuring Yido. Yido tensely told Veronica that it was hopeless, and they needed to run immediately. But Veronica, looking worried, asked Yido about Liddy, saying they couldn't just leave him behind like that. Seeing this, Liddy was surprised to realize that they couldn't escape because of him. Yido then said they had no other choice but to fight back, and advised Veronica to use her mana to defeat Xanamund. Veronica, with a sad and tense expression, refused, saying she couldn't do it because it would put Liddy's life in danger. Liddy immediately yelled for her not to worry about him, and demanded that she act now, or else the whole group would die. Veronica was still distraught, not knowing what to do, but Liddy kept yelling, begging her not to hesitate. Meanwhile, Xanamund closed in on Veronica, preparing to strike. Finally, she had no other choice but to use her power. As she began to focus her mana, Xanamund was surprised, wondering if she was casting a wind spell. However, upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't a spell. The girl was letting her mana run wild. She was unleashing all of it, creating a storm of pure destruction. Xanamund was stunned by her power, wondering how a single person could possess such a vast amount of mana. This was unprecedented, and he realized his barrier wouldn't be able to withstand the storm. A giant whirlwind erupted, crushing everything around Veronica. When the storm finally subsided, she sank to the ground in sorrow, feeling like a failure for not being able to control her mana. She felt a profound sadness, believing she had killed Yido and Liddy with her uncontrolled mana. Just as she was about to cry, she suddenly heard Liddy's voice telling her they were still alive. Veronica was surprised and overjoyed to see them both safe. Veronica bowed her head and apologized to Liddy for the chaos, then confessed the truth, that she had never been able to control her mana, no matter how much she studied. In fact, she wouldn't even dare call what she did a spell. She had simply released all the mana she possibly could. Yido cut in, saying that if Veronica thought he'd come here to learn how to control mana, she was mistaken. He hadn't seen any progress at all. Veronica asked Liddy in surprise how he managed to escape. Liddy replied that it was much simpler than she thought. The assassin dispelled the rope binding Liddy at the last minute, probably because Xanamund needed all his mana to defend against her attack. Liddy explained that he had dashed towards Yido just before the whirlwind swept through, and hid under the roots of a tree. Hearing this, Veronica was surprised, feeling that Liddy spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She realized that in that situation, making the right decision so quickly wasn't something just anyone could do, and that it was an incredible feat. She was even more surprised when she remembered Liddy had once said he was a rookie. Veronica apologized to Liddy for the incident, but she couldn't help but ask what he did before becoming an adventurer. Veronica asked again in surprise, "A porter for whom?" And Liddy smiled, explaining that he used to be a porter for Mr. Rozark's party, the Heroes' Party. Hearing this, both Veronica and Yido were stunned, unable to believe their ears, and asked Liddy if he was serious. The scene shifts to Xanamund, who is laughing loudly, thinking about the extraordinary power that girl possessed, the power that allowed her to escape him. Xanamund decided that he must have her, and with the sky as his witness, he swore he would take her life. He laughed again with glee at the thought. The scene shifts back to Liddy and Veronica, who have finally reached the Dawn River. Liddy pointed towards the river and told Veronica and Yido to look. Hearing that, Yido asked if this was the river with the bridge. Liddy nodded and explained that it was the indestructible bridge, built by order of the current king. At the time, many thought building it was impossible, but thanks to the help of skilled builders from all over, the bridge was completed after decades of effort. Then Liddy, without looking at the bridge himself, told them to behold the result of those long years of hard labor. The Great Dawn Bridge. However, both Veronica and Yido were stunned to see that the bridge had been destroyed. Veronica worriedly said to Liddy, "But I thought the bridge was supposed to be indestructible." Liddy replied that they were out of luck and would have to swim across. Ito, surprised, asked Liddy if he was serious, pointing out that if so, he would have to carry Veronica on his back. Ito then asked who could have done this, since this was supposed to be the sturdiest bridge around. Liddy was also pondering this with a curious look. At that moment, Veronica saw a group of people and asked if they were saying anything. Liddy replied that they might be villagers from the nearby town. Liddy used a hearing spell to listen in on them, then shared that the people were telling each other they should stay away from the riverbank. Suddenly, a creature emerged from the water. Upon seeing the creature, Veronica screamed that it was a sea serpent. Ito cried out that this thing was massive, even for a sea serpent. Liddy agreed, adding that he'd never seen one this huge before. Liddy thought that this monster must have been the one that destroyed the bridge. Suddenly, a voice rang out, demanding they surrender. Ito was stunned and shouted, unable to believe the sea serpent could talk. Veronica replied worriedly that it was telepathy. The serpent spoke again, this time demanding the man to surrender. Ito nervously told everyone to hold on, because the serpent was targeting Veronica. The serpent lunged at her, but Liddy quickly dashed forward and saved her just in time. Afterward, Liddy thought about the serpent's speed, despite its enormous size, and realized that if it could use telepathy, it could probably use magic too. Just then, Veronica noticed something in the serpent's eyes and yelled that something was coming. Just as she cried out, the serpent launched an Aqua Nova attack at them. Ito was clipped by the attack, but Liddy quickly pulled him out of the danger zone. Then, Liddy sprinted to escape the crashing waves. Ito shouted worriedly, asking what the sea serpent was doing here. Liddy replied that he didn't know either. Suddenly, Liddy noticed something and hurriedly pushed both Ito and Veronica away to protect them. He did it because the serpent was about to charge at them. Seeing this, both Ito and Veronica panicked, worried that Liddy would be killed. However, to the surprise of both Veronica and the sea serpent, Liddy managed to stop the serpent's charge. Ito, stunned, asked how Liddy could have stopped that attack, unable to believe Liddy's strength. Liddy ordered Veronica and Ito to run immediately. Ito shouted in protest, saying they couldn't just abandon Liddy, but Liddy yelled back at them to run now. He insisted that he could hold the serpent off for a while, but he couldn't defeat a monster that massive. Hearing this, both Veronica and Ito tensed up, calling out Liddy's name. Ito realized that Liddy was no ordinary person, even though he wasn't a warrior. Sure, Liddy had been through countless battles as an excellent porter, but he wasn't lying when he said he was just a rookie adventurer with no combat skills. Meanwhile, the serpent demanded to know who Liddy was, daring him to block its path. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared, surrounding Liddy and the serpent. Seeing this, Veronica realized it was an ancient magic circle. She screamed at Liddy, telling him to get out of there right now and to run away. Unexpectedly, a Terra Needle spell was used to attack the serpent, injuring it and leaving Veronica and Ito stunned. Liddy smiled and said that he recognized that spell. In fact, it was Ignore who had cast that spell on the serpent. She yelled about Rosark and his irresponsible words, insisting that they couldn't just leave Liddy behind alone. Liddy felt happy to see Ignore, and upon hearing her name, both Veronica and Ito were stunned, asking if she was the mage from the hero's party, the very same Ignore they had heard of. Immediately after, Ignore confronted the sea serpent by herself, using various spells to defeat it. Meanwhile, the sea serpent tried to escape. Liddy rushed over to hug Ignore, saying it had been a long time. Ignore replied, happy to see that Liddy was safe. Liddy then asked Ignore what she was doing here, and Ignore answered that she had some business to take care of in the area. Overhearing their conversation, Ito realized that Ignore was indeed the mage from the hero's party. This meant Liddy truly was their porter, and he hadn't been lying after all. Ito then turned to Veronica to ask if she was listening, but realized that Veronica was completely mesmerized by Ignore's magical abilities. Veronica thought Ignore's magic was like a work of art. The way she cast powerful spells one after another without any incantations, with such precise control over every detail and without even needing to draw a magic circle, Veronica had no doubt that this girl was the talented mage Miss Ignore. Then, Ignore turned to Liddy and asked about his relationship with the girl, demanding that he be honest. Liddy replied that Veronica was one of his adventuring companions. Ignore immediately retorted, saying Veronica was too cute to be just an adventuring companion, that it couldn't possibly be just that. She added that Veronica looked like she came from a very wealthy family. Ignore then asked Liddy if Veronica was a noble and why he had brought her along with him. Liddy was about to answer when Ignore cut him off, insisting that it couldn't possibly be true. Ignore expressed that she really didn't want to believe it and asked Liddy if he had stolen Veronica from her home so they could run away together. Liddy gently suggested to Veronica and Yido that they should wait until Miss Ignore calmed down. He explained that Ignore was very smart, but sometimes she overthought things and jumped to the wrong conclusions. Veronica replied that she understood, while Ignore continued shouting to herself about what to tell Demoness and Pharaoh when she met them, insisting that everything was Rosark's fault. The scene transitions to a few minutes later where Liddy and Veronica are explaining everything to Ignore. After understanding the situation, Ignore told Liddy it seemed like he'd taken on another troublesome delivery job. Liddy smiled and replied that yes, it was the only thing he was good at. Ignore then asked Liddy how he'd been, and if life as an adventurer was treating him well. Liddy replied that he wasn't sure if it was good, but being an adventurer was a lot harder than he had imagined. He went on to tell Ignore that they had just narrowly escaped an assassination attempt by someone. Liddy had forgotten the person's name and asked Veronica. Veronica answered that if she remembered correctly, his name was Zanamund. Hearing the name Zanamund, Ignore was stunned and tensely asked if they were talking about that noble assassin. Liddy replied that yes, he thought Zanamund had called himself that. Ignore started to panic, telling Liddy that the man was a menace and that he would be in grave danger if he ran into Zanamund again, especially since Liddy had no combat skills. Ignore added that even she would have a hard time facing Zanamund alone, so she decided she had no choice but to go with Liddy, otherwise he'd just get himself killed. A moment later, Ignore realized something and asked Liddy that if Zanamund had already attacked them, how were they still standing in front of her? Liddy replied that he was glad Ignore asked, then shared that it was all thanks to Veronica, because her amazing magic had stopped Zanamund and saved them. Hearing this, Veronica started to blush, hastily asking Liddy what he was talking about. In a panic, Veronica cried out for Liddy to stop, asking if he was trying to embarrass her in front of Lady Ignore. Ignore, curious, asked Veronica what she meant by that. Veronica replied that unfortunately it wasn't real magic. She had just let her mana go out of control. At that, Veronica sadly apologized and bowed her head to Ignore. After hearing Veronica's words, Ignore asked again if she had said she studied at Thekar, pointing out that the instructors there were clearly excellent. Veronica tensely replied that yes, it was probably because she had no talent for magic. Ignore thought for a moment and then asked Veronica to take her hand. Veronica, confused, took Ignore's hand and wondered what was happening. In that moment, Ignore used some kind of spell to investigate something. After a minute, Ignore opened her eyes and exclaimed that she knew it all along. No wonder the instructors there couldn't teach Veronica anything. Liddy curiously asked Ignore what it was. Ignore replied that she had something to tell both Veronica and Liddy. She then told Veronica that she had an abundant amount of mana but couldn't control her magic. As for Liddy, Ignore said that while he was a good porter, he had no way of fighting back against his enemies. With such a hopeless party composition, she doubted Liddy could get much further, let alone complete his journey. In fact, things had been snuffed out from the very beginning, all thanks to their encounter with Zanamund. At that moment, Yido looked at Ignore curiously, wondering what she thought of him. However, Veronica shouted that no matter what, they still had to reach their intended destination. Ignore cut them off, saying she would give them a quest. Hearing this, everyone was stunned and shouted in unison, asking what kind of quest it was. Ignore reassured them that if they could overcome their weaknesses, they would be able to solve their main problems. She repeated that, as mentioned before, they both had clear weaknesses. Liddy couldn't be allowed to continue this dangerous journey in his current state. However, if Veronica and Liddy worked together, they could compensate for each other's weaknesses. Ignore then shared that, for this quest, she wanted the two of them to defeat the sea serpent within 1 hour. Liddy asked in surprise if Ignore really wanted them to defeat the sea serpent. Veronica, panicking, asked how they could possibly do that. Ignore, not hearing Veronica's question, turned back to Liddy and asked if he could do it. Obviously, this quest was far beyond his capabilities, but Liddy still wanted to try. Even if the chances of winning were incredibly low, he still wanted to take on the challenge. That was the kind of determination an adventurer needed to have. Ignore then turned to Veronica and said she would explain why Veronica couldn't control her mana, but first, Ignore asked Veronica if one of her ancestors was an elf. Hearing this question, Yido exclaimed in disbelief, arguing that Veronica was the princess of a human kingdom, and that it couldn't possibly be true. He added that if this news were to leak out, it would cause serious trouble. However, Veronica told Yido to stop and explained that, according to legend, the king from 4 generations ago, Idnil, the king of expeditions, was actually the son of a nameless concubine of the previous king. Ignore immediately cut in and revealed that the concubine was actually an elf, and children born between humans and elves are always blessed with mystical powers. This perfectly explained Veronica's condition. Veronica's immense mana was a result of her mixed elven and human blood. Hearing that, Veronica curiously asked if she really had elven blood in her. Ignore moved closer to Veronica and said that, in terms of mana levels alone, Veronica might even surpass her, which meant she was truly blessed. Ignore further explained that Veronica's poor control was due to her magic circle. Magic circles are magical constructs created by the user's mana to control magic. With an abundant amount of mana like Veronica's, no normal level magic circle could withstand it, causing it to break and her spells to go out of control. Ignore then said that normally she would teach Veronica how to create a more robust magic circle to handle her immense mana. But this wasn't something Veronica could learn in a single day. Hearing this, Veronica sadly replied that she felt very disappointed in herself. Even though Liddy had tried his best to help her, and now she even had Lady Ignore's guidance, she still felt like she couldn't do anything in return. And that was just too cruel. Ignore smiled and said that Veronica was perfectly capable of doing it. Since your problem stems from your bloodline, elven-related issues require elven solutions. Ignore then asked Liddy to pay attention, emphasizing that the success of this mission depended entirely on him. Liddy, confused, asked what this had to do with him. The scene then shifts to the shore of the Dawn River, where Liddy and the others were standing on the shore. People from a nearby village tried to warn them about the sea serpent, but Liddy apologized for causing trouble and explained that they were preparing to face the serpent. Hearing this, the astonished villagers asked if he was insane. Ignore explained that this sea serpent monster lived by absorbing mana, and with Veronica in the group, it was certain to appear again. Therefore, they needed to stay vigilant. Veronica replied that she understood. At that moment, Yido, a little annoyed with Ignore, said that he initially thought she was an intelligent and beautiful person. But then she came up with such a dangerous plan, making him wonder if all elves were that cruel. Ignore replied that she thought she had been very kind by guiding them, perhaps even coddling them too much. But could they really blame her? After all, when an artisan sees a diamond in the rough, they naturally want to polish it to make it shine brighter. And right now, I'm holding 2 large diamonds in my hands. Just then, the sea serpent appeared. Seeing it, Ignore shouted that everything now depended on Liddy and Veronica, encouraging them to give it their all. Right then, Liddy reviewed the plan with Veronica and said, "Let's do this." Veronica responded with a firm nod. As Liddy and Veronica began their task, Yido jumped into the fray, declaring that he would support them. Yido tried to distract the serpent and draw its attention to ease the pressure on Liddy. However, it wasn't long before the serpent quickly forced Yido to retreat. Seeing Yido in danger, Veronica cried out in alarm. Liddy explained that Yido was buying them time by distracting the serpent, so they couldn't waste the opportunity he had created. Then he told Veronica that he was about to start sprinting. Veronica replied that she was ready. In fact, Liddy was running with Veronica on his back, while she used her magic to draw a large magic circle. Veronica carefully remembered the instructions, drawing each line slowly and precisely. The story flashes back to a little earlier when Ignore explained that they would be using a method that elves often teach their children when they first start learning magic. Ignore shared that elves teach their children to run in a circle while drawing a giant magic circle in the air. She further explained that the durability of a magic circle depends on its strength and size. As long as the magic circle is large enough, even a novice can use it to unleash powerful spells. Ignore added that she would bet this method wasn't taught at the Human Academy because ordinary people don't have enough mana to exceed the limits of a magic circle. For Veronica to handle her immense amount of mana, she needed to draw an extremely large magic circle. She had to make it as large as humanly possible. The story returns to the present, where the sea serpent has caught the scent of Liddy and Veronica, making Yido tense up. The sea serpent lunged to attack, causing Ignore to scream at Liddy to keep running. She reminded him that the magic circle didn't have to be a perfect circle. It was enough, as long as the lines in the air formed an arc. Ignore also yelled at Veronica, telling her to stay focused and not to break the line, or the magic circle would be nullified. "Okay!" Liddy and Veronica replied in unison and began to focus intently. Meanwhile, Ignore whispered to herself, cursing Rosark as an insufferable fool, a brute and a scoundrel who didn't know when to stop joking. But, she admitted, The one good thing about Rosark was that he never lied. Meanwhile, Liddy was dodging every attack from the serpent by moving in a zigzag pattern. He turned his head back to ask Veronica if she was okay and if he was shaking her around too much. Veronica replied that she was fine. Liddy then shouted encouragingly, "You can do this!" and urged her to show everyone the results of her relentless efforts. He reminded her that she had spent the last 5 years studying magic, which was almost as long as he had been dreaming of becoming an adventurer. Liddy placed his absolute trust in Veronica, saying that if anyone could do this, it was definitely her. Filled with confidence, Veronica shouted, "I'll definitely do it!" Meanwhile, the sea serpent began to create a binding magic circle, making Yido tense up as he realized that both Liddy and Veronica were trapped, unable to escape its jaws. Just then, Liddy shouted at the snake, telling it that it couldn't catch them that easily and to never underestimate a porter from the hero's party. With that, he leaped into the air using his level 96 jump skill. At the same time, Veronica hoped the magic lines she was drawing would connect successfully. Finally, she was able to link the lines, forming a complete circle. Seeing this, Yido was stunned, realizing that Veronica had finally done it. With the sea serpent now right over the magic circle, Liddy yelled that it was all up to her to finish it, wishing her good luck. Ignore congratulated Veronica on properly completing her first spell, and advised her that she didn't need to use any complex incantations for this first time. She encouraged Veronica, telling her to start with the basics. Veronica began to chant, "O spirits of ice, hear my plea, summon the enveloping chill, and freeze all that stands in my way." Meanwhile, the sea serpent was also preparing to unleash its Aqua Nova attack. Seeing this, Yido tensed up, realizing the situation was extremely dangerous because the sea serpent was using its own high-level magic. Just then, Veronica completed her spell, Icy Breeze, a level 1 spell, to counter the serpent's level 49 attack. As the two spells clashed, Veronica worried about the outcome. To everyone's surprise, the sea serpent's entire body was completely frozen by Veronica's spell. After being frozen, the serpent fell into the river. Witnessing this, both Liddy and Veronica burst out in joy, realizing they had succeeded. Yido was also astonished, unable to believe that Liddy and Veronica had actually taken down the sea serpent. He even told Liddy to look, saying they could do anything if they dared to try. Liddy humbly replied that he didn't think he'd done much, feeling like he'd just been running around in circles. Veronica quickly cut in, telling him not to downplay his own worth, emphasizing that they couldn't have succeeded without him. Ignore also agreed with Veronica, stating that creating such a huge magic circle while being targeted by an enemy was nearly impossible. She stressed that this achievement was only possible thanks to Liddy's excellent mobility. Afterward, Ignore announced that both Liddy and Veronica had passed the test, praising them for excellently using their individual strengths to cover for each other's weaknesses. They were both overjoyed and thanked Ignore for her help. The villagers were also thrilled because the sea serpent had now become a makeshift bridge, which they saw as a true miracle. Some even praised Liddy and Veronica for not only defeating the sea serpent that had terrorized the region, but also creating a new bridge for the village. The entire village thanked Liddy and Veronica for their help. Hearing these words of gratitude, Liddy was moved to tears. This made Yido laugh and tease him, asking why he was bawling his eyes out like that, and that a man shouldn't cry in public. Veronica quickly told Yido to stop teasing Liddy. Liddy just laughed and apologized for crying. Ignore admitted that Rosark was right, that Liddy truly was special, and that his positivity brought hope to everyone around him. She thought that without a doubt, Liddy would become a great adventurer in the future. As things began to settle down, Liddy asked Ignore if she wanted to travel with them for a while. Ignore thanked him for the offer, saying she'd love to join, but unfortunately, she couldn't, as she had a small matter to take care of first. Veronica then timidly stepped up to Ignore and expressed her gratitude. She thanked Ignore profusely, explaining that she was able to cast her first ever spell. Veronica added that she believed it was all thanks to Ignore's wonderful guidance, and she would always cherish this experience. Ignore, feeling a bit weary of the emotional display, told Veronica not to get so worked up, saying she only taught her the basics. Finally, Ignore said her goodbyes to everyone. Before leaving, Ignore said that she would always be cheering them on in their journey ahead. She encouraged them to be confident in their path and expressed her belief that they would be able to overcome any challenge that lay before them. Liddy and Veronica cheerfully declared that they definitely would. As Ignore turned to leave, she told herself that she'd done the right thing by not dragging Liddy and Veronica, the adventurers of the new era, into this fight. She thought that whether the Monster Lord was still alive or not, The problems of the old era were a matter for the adventurers of the previous generation. This implied that the monster lord had not been defeated, and perhaps Ignore had come to take Liddy with her, but she quickly dismissed that thought. The scene changes to the kingdom of Fenalicia, where a guard announces that it is time to receive the acting queen. Princess Flora declares to everyone that today she will welcome her husband and officially assume the throne as the Queen of Fenalicia. The crowd is taken aback, wondering if Flora is really getting married and becoming queen. Flora explains that with the king being gravely ill, he has decided he can no longer continue his duties and wishes to appoint a successor to the throne. Flora adds that she wishes to fulfill the king's final wish before it's too late, and despite her inexperience, Flora asks for everyone's support as she officially becomes the Queen of Fenalicia. At first, everyone was silent, but then they suddenly started cheering for Flora, wishing her a long life as queen. Then Flora introduced her fiancé, whose name was Mac. When Mac entered the court, he complimented Flora on her excellent royal speech. Flora smiled and thanked Mac for the compliment. Mac proceeded to ask everyone to begin the conference. Suddenly, a warrior from the kingdom arrived and demanded the conference be stopped. Mac replied that, if he recalled correctly, this man must be Sir Schwartz, right? He remarked that this was the first time Schwartz had come to the capital in a whole year. Just then, Schwartz turned and shouted that he had to ask a question, asking if everyone really saw no problem with Mac brazenly seizing the king's throne. He questioned everyone, asking who Mac thought he was to dare do such a thing. Schwartz went on to say that first, Mac appeared unannounced, and then introduced himself with a name that even Schwartz had never heard of. He asked what Mac thought he was. Schwartz continued to raise his voice, asking why no one in the kingdom had spoken up to criticize Mac's actions. He declared that Mac's purpose was clear. He was trying to usurp the king's throne. At that moment, the surrounding space was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. All eyes were fixed on Schwartz, and no one dared to speak. Schwartz asked in surprise, "What's wrong? Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Suddenly, Mac stepped up behind Schwartz and clapped, complimenting him on his excellent declaration and praising Schwartz's bravery. Schwartz was stunned, not realizing when Mac had moved behind him. Mac approached Schwartz, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said that Schwartz was completely different from the rest, who only knew how to follow orders. He acknowledged that Schwartz had the courage to criticize things he felt were out of place. Mac added that it was an excellent quality in times of war. Immediately after, Mac suddenly attacked Schwartz, declaring that people like Schwartz have no place in an era of peace. After Schwartz was killed, Mac returned to sit on the throne and asked if anyone else had any objections before they continued. Seeing the murderous aura radiating from Mac, everyone was terrified and fell silent. Suddenly, a girl tried to speak up, saying she had a report for His Majesty. Marie, the head of national security, smiled at Mac and asked what he wanted to know. She apologized for bearing bad news, explaining that the security team had been unable to secure Princess Veronica in Thikar. Marie reported that Princess Veronica had escaped, and her current whereabouts were unknown. She feared that Veronica might be on her way back to the kingdom. Upon hearing this, the entire crowd was astonished. Mac remarked that this seemed like a serious problem and asked Flora what they should do. However, Flora looked at Marie with a furious glare. Seeing Flora's furious glare, Marie was frightened and began to tremble. Flora then immediately asked how that could have happened. Marie nervously replied, saying she was just reporting the situation. Flora yelled that she didn't need any reports. She just wanted results, and only results. She told Marie that if she couldn't complete such a simple task, then it would be best to find someone else to take Marie's place. Hearing this, Marie was completely stunned with fear. She bowed before Flora and said she would immediately arrange a new captor team, and begged Flora to give her one more chance. Mac laughed loudly, saying that was quite an impressive performance. Flora assured him it wasn't just a performance, because she would absolutely not let Veronica take the throne. The scene shifts to Liddy and Veronica, who are fishing. Veronica struggled and struggled, but couldn't catch a single fish, which led Yido to advise her to just give up, since not everyone is born a master fisherman. Veronica asked Yido if he was saying she was useless at fishing. In fact, her fishing skill was only level 1. Veronica shared that she believed the key to being a successful fisherman was patience. She had read it in a book, so she knew. Yido then asked why she didn't take a look at Liddy's results. When Veronica looked over, she was surprised to see that Liddy had caught a lot of fish. Liddy cheerfully said that he'd caught a whole bunch, and his success was thanks to his fishing skill, which was currently at level 76. Besides that, Liddy also found a lot of fruit using his gathering skill, which is currently at level 71. Afterwards, he cooked using his level 88 cooking skill. Liddy made a dish called longtail fish aquapazza, along with plenty of vegetables and a vegetable soup. He invited both Veronica and Yido to have some. Seeing the food, both Yido and Veronica were amazed, and after eating, they praised how delicious it was. Liddy replied that he was glad they liked it. Yido curiously asked where Liddy learned to cook this. Liddy answered that he was usually the one in charge of meals in the hero's party. Liddy also shared that it really brought back memories because back in his hero party days, they often had to cook with whatever they could find on their journey. Everyone had their own tastes, so preparing meals to suit each person was a real challenge. Sometimes he even had to sneak in a few things they didn't like to make sure they had a balanced diet. Yido asked in surprise if Liddy was their nanny. Liddy replied that he was sure Veronica would get better at fishing if she kept at it. Yido said he didn't know that, and Veronica replied that she used to love staying inside the castle all day. She shared that she would often read, study on her own, and pretend to be a mage, but Flera was the complete opposite. Flera loved going out and exploring the world outside. Veronica added that sometimes Flera would coax her into sneaking out of the castle, and they'd get scolded for it together. Veronica asserted that if Flera were here with her, she'd definitely become a skilled fisherwoman in no time. Veronica's eyes welled up with tears as she said that she really wanted to see Flera. Yido was surprised to see her like that, while Liddy gently placed a hand on her shoulder, comforting her. "Don't worry, you'll see Flera soon." Liddy also promised to take Veronica home. Hearing those words, Veronica was impressed and couldn't stop looking at Liddy. Yido also reminded Veronica not to forget that she had his help too. Veronica was very happy and apologized to them both for worrying them. She then shared that she had made up her mind. No matter what difficulties stood in her way, she would definitely see Flera again. The scene shifts to that evening as Liddy and Veronica finally arrived at Mount Xavier. Liddy pointed and told everyone to look up. Yido replied that it seemed Liddy was only seeing one mountain, while there were many here, and he didn't know which one was Mount Xavier because they all looked the same. Liddy replied tensely, telling Yido that if he just looked closely, he'd recognize it immediately because Mount Xavier has a shimmering aura around it. This is the homeland of Demoness, the warrior from the hero's party. Liddy added that it was no mistake to call it a historic site. At that, Yido looked confused because he couldn't see any aura. Liddy happily shared that he never thought he'd get the chance to see Mount Xavier so soon. Suddenly, Yido became tense and urgently told Liddy to stop. Yido desperately pleaded with Liddy not to say that Mount Xavier was actually home to a den of dragons. Liddy replied firmly, stating that there were no dragons in the Mount Xavier area. However, Yido pointed towards some dragons and asked if they were heading their way. Veronica curiously asked Yido if those dragons were his friends. Yido yelled angrily, denying it immediately, saying of course not, and told Veronica not to lump him in with those low-level monsters. Yido then explained that those creatures were winged drakes, a species of dragon that wasn't very intelligent, to the point that you couldn't even converse with them. Yido added that winged drakes are the only type of dragon that lives in flocks, and a flock this size usually means they're on the hunt. Veronica felt tense seeing their massive numbers. Yido urgently told Liddy and Veronica to run immediately. However, at that moment, Liddy stood frozen, unable to take his eyes off the flock of dragons. At the same time, Yido yelled that they were in great danger. As the flock of winged drakes charged straight for them, although they can't use magic, they possess sharp claws and beaks, plus thick, tough hides. These dragons are most dangerous when they hunt in a pack. Veronica suggested to Yido that he should talk to the winged drakes, thinking they might listen to him since he was a dragon. Yido shouted angrily, telling Veronica not to be stupid, reminding her that he'd already said they weren't like him. He continued to scream that they had to run immediately. Meanwhile, Liddy stood silently, which made Yido shout frantically, asking what Liddy was doing, because they needed to get Veronica out of this situation. Liddy wondered in confusion why the winged drakes were flying towards Mount Xavier. Yido was just as confused, asking how they were supposed to know that. Yido explained that from what he knew, these dragons just wanted to chase them out of their territory. Liddy then asked tensely, "Don't tell me Demoness's homeland is being attacked by those winged drakes." Suddenly, a winged drake attacked Veronica, but Liddy quickly jumped in and dodged the blow. Yido hurriedly urged Liddy to get them out of this area. Liddy mentioned that he thought there were a lot of dwarves living on Mount Xavier, and if they ran in that direction, they would lead the flock of winged drakes right to them. Hearing this, Veronica was surprised while a tense Yido shouted at Liddy, unable to believe he was actually planning to fight. Liddy answered firmly, saying they had to stop the flock of winged drakes right here and now. Yido asked again if Liddy was seriously joking, but Liddy just dodged another attack and asked Veronica if she could use her magic to deal with the winged drake flock, adding that he'd help her create a magic circle just like before. Veronica, still bewildered, asked Liddy if he was sure, explaining that creating a magic circle large enough for her spell would take time, and she was worried a winged drake could charge in, break the circle, and cause the spell to fail. Liddy nodded, confirming she was right and admitting he hadn't thought of that. He said the only option left was for Yido to use his magic to blast them away. Yido was stunned and asked Liddy if he seriously thought he could do something like that. Liddy, confused, asked Yido why he couldn't. Yido yelled back, asking what Liddy meant by that, and finally decided to explain it to him. Yido explained that maintaining a magic circle requires a great deal of concentration, and that creating one while moving is typically something only experts can manage. The fact Veronica could do it was nothing short of phenomenal. In fact, Yido admitted that he didn't have a single spell with enough mana to get rid of all the drakes pursuing them. Hearing this, a tense Liddy asked what they were going to do. Then he realized that neither Yido's nor Veronica's magic would be effective, which meant he had to come up with another plan. He felt a bit frustrated with himself, wishing he could fight on his own. Then things wouldn't be so difficult. Just then, a drake suddenly swooped in to attack from behind, causing Veronica to cry out in panic, warning Liddy. However, it was too late for Liddy to react. And just then, out of nowhere, Demoness appeared and blocked the attack, wounding the drake. Meanwhile, both Yido and Veronica stared at Demoness in astonishment, while Liddy was also slightly surprised to see him. Demoness remarked that he could see Liddy hadn't changed at all. Liddy happily replied that it had been a while, and he was really glad to see Demoness. Demoness replied that he felt the same, but their conversation would have to wait. He turned around and began to fight the drakes. Seeing the wounded drakes, Liddy shouted to Demoness that two of them were starting to fly away. Demoness called back, telling Liddy to get ready, then started running towards him. Liddy yelled back and got into position, readying himself for something. Yido and Veronica looked at each other in confusion, not understanding what he was about to do. Just then, Demoness leaped onto Liddy's hands, and Liddy used his strength to vault Demoness high into the air. Once airborne, Demoness struck one drake with a direct hit, and then took down the second by throwing his axe at it. In the end, Demoness had taken down all the drakes. Veronica watched the scene in utter amazement, while Yido was also stunned by the power of the hero's party warrior. Just then, Liddy shouted Demoness's name and ran happily towards him. Demoness immediately braced himself to catch Liddy, opening his arms and calling for him to come. When Liddy leapt into his arms for a hug, Demoness was suddenly pushed back by the sheer force. However, Demoness quickly dug in his heels, holding his ground. Seeing this, both Yido and Veronica felt a bit tense. Demoness then told Liddy it was almost painful to see him doing so well. Liddy laughed and agreed, saying he felt the same. Yido walked closer and asked if that was some kind of ritual. The scene shifts to a few minutes later with Demoness and the group on their way to the dwarven village. Along the way, Demoness shared that while Liddy might seem dependable now, he was a total liability when he first started out. Demoness explained that Liddy used to run away screaming at the sight of any monster, no matter how weak. A surprised Veronica replied that she had no idea, while Yido, also taken aback, asked if Liddy was really that much of a coward. Liddy, embarrassed, pleaded with Demoness to stop making him look bad. Demoness then admitted that his adventures with the hero had really warped his sense of normalcy. He realized he hadn't noticed how different their party was until he returned to normal society. Demoness further explained that he met Liddy because Liddy was exceptionally strong by human standards. Hearing this, Liddy blushed and smiled brightly. Yido tensely remarked that he thought Demoness's common sense was still a bit lacking, adding that launching him several dozen meters into the air was a serious underestimation of Liddy's power. Demoness then bowed to Veronica and Yido, expressing his wish for them to continue being good friends with Liddy. Flustered, Veronica tensely told Demoness not to be so humble, assuring him they were very happy to be friends with Liddy. Demoness then told them it was time for them to part ways. He pointed in one direction and explained that this path would lead them to Fenalicia. Just then, Liddy hesitated for a moment, but finally asked if he could help Demoness deal with the winged drakes. Demoness replied that he had intended to keep this to himself so as not to worry Liddy, but it seemed Liddy had become much more perceptive. The scene then shifts to when Liddy and the others finally arrived at Demoness's hometown. Liddy eagerly asked Demoness if this was really his hometown. Demoness replied with a nod, explaining that this was a small, peaceful village where most people earned their living in the mines or at the forges. He added that they lived diligently, contributing to the village in their own ways. Veronica replied that she didn't know what to say, but this village was indeed very quiet. Demoness replied that the reason it was so quiet was because winged drakes had been continuously attacking the place for the past week. These dragons appeared suddenly from far up in the sky. Each time they appeared, they would wreak havoc on the village and injure the people. The warriors guarding the place couldn't do much because these dragons attacked from the air. Demoness continued, sharing that luckily he had just returned recently, so they had been able to keep the damage to a minimum. However, the danger from the winged drake still loomed, leaving them no choice but to have the women and children stay indoors until the threat had passed. At that moment, Veronica noticed a little girl peering at them through a crack in a window. Veronica smiled and waved, but the girl immediately tensed up and quickly hid inside. Demoness went on to say that they still didn't know the reason for the winged drake's attacks, and until they found out why, they had no choice but to remain on high alert. He added that if they just had one clue as to the cause, it would be a good start. Suddenly, Yido spoke up, telling everyone to stop, because if they really couldn't figure it out, it was pretty obvious. Liddy and Demoness looked at each other in confusion and curiosity, asking what he was talking about. Yido angrily asked if they were serious, when Veronica spoke up, telling Yido that both Liddy and Demoness were having a serious conversation, and she didn't understand why he was joking at a time like this. However, Yido yelled angrily, insisting that he wasn't joking at all. Suddenly, Yido realized something and felt embarrassed as he admitted that he'd forgotten humans can't hear it. But with the sharp ears of a proud Lexi dragon like himself, it was crystal clear. Yido continued, saying that he could hear the cry of a drakeling from within the village. Hearing this, Demoness asked in surprise, "A drakeling? In the village?" Yido confirmed, saying that yes, the drakeling was crying for help, and that was probably why the winged drakes were attacking. It might be the child of the swarm's leader, so they're mobilizing all their forces to search the entire village. Veronica happily praised Yido for his sharp deduction, but Demoness immediately interrupted, saying that it didn't make sense. He pointed out that no one in the village had ever seen the hide nor hair of a drakeling. Yido replied that it was no wonder no one had seen it, because the drakeling's cry was coming from the mountain. He pointed to a specific spot, and as Demoness followed his gaze, he realized it was the abandoned mines. Demoness explained that the dwarves in the village used to mine there in the past, but about 10 years ago, a group of monsters appeared, making the place too dangerous. It's been sealed off ever since, and no one knows what it's been like inside recently. Demoness guessed that the monsters had probably multiplied rapidly over time, and it was highly likely that the inside of the mine had become their nest, like a dungeon. Veronica curiously asked if that meant what she thought it meant. Demoness replied, confirming that it did, and explained that to stop the winged drake's attack on the village, they had to go into the abandoned mines and find the drakeling. Hearing this, Liddy's face lit up, excitedly shouting that they were about to raid a dungeon. Demoness replied in agreement, adding that he could see Liddy's passion for dungeon diving hadn't changed a bit over the years. In the next scene, Demoness used his strength to break the chain locking the mine door, while Liddy moved the boulder blocking the entrance. Demoness then told everyone to get ready, as he would lead them inside. Demoness also asked Princess Veronica and Yido to stay behind him. He then told Liddy that he was counting on him to guard the rear. Liddy, confused, replied, "Wait a minute. A dungeon is actually very complex, almost like a labyrinth. Furthermore, with limited visibility, there's a very high chance that any adventuring party could be ambushed from behind. Therefore, the members with the weakest defense, like porters and mages, are usually placed in the center of the party. The role of the rear guard is crucial. They're responsible for protecting the party's back and staying alert for surprise attacks. Therefore, they're usually the strongest warriors in the group." So, Liddy wasn't shocked at all. On the contrary, he was surprised that Demoness would ask him to take on such an important role. Liddy excitedly declared that he would protect all of them, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Seeing this, a confused Yido asked why Liddy was suddenly acting like that. Demoness praised Liddy's spirit and encouraged him to hold on to those words. After that, Demoness ordered everyone to keep moving forward, as their goal on this trip was to find the drakeling. As they entered, Demoness thanked Yido for the light spell, saying that holding a torch would slow his reflexes. Yido smugly said that they should all be grateful he was with them. Otherwise, Veronica would be the only one who could use magic. He joked that surely no one would want that, as their minds would probably collapse. Hearing this, Veronica irritably called out Yido's name, telling him to be quiet. Suddenly, Demoness yelled for everyone to be careful because there was a monster. Yido asked in a panic, "What?" But after taking a closer look, Demoness let out a sigh of relief and said it was just a basic slime, nothing to worry about. Demoness then asked Liddy to try fighting it. Liddy confidently agreed. Seeing this, a confused Veronica asked if Liddy was really going to fight. Yido also wondered curiously if Liddy could even swing the weapon. Liddy ran toward the slime with the axe in his hand, preparing to attack. But as he got closer, he suddenly realized the axe was no longer in his hand. Confused, he looked around and asked where the axe had gone. Yido, surprised, asked if Liddy really didn't know that the axe had slipped out of his hand and gotten stuck in the ceiling when he swung it. Liddy asked in astonishment, "What?" Just then, Demoness yelled for Liddy to be careful. But when Liddy turned to look, he was attacked by the slime. However, the slime was defeated right after it attacked Liddy. Afterward, Liddy was silent, not saying a word. Demoness remarked that at least the slime was defeated that way, but he also noted that Liddy hadn't improved at all. Liddy sadly apologized. Demoness went on to point out that Liddy's biggest weakness was his poor offensive ability. He added that Liddy's combat skills were practically non-existent, since he couldn't even use a weapon to attack. Yido also chimed in, saying he guessed Liddy was probably an expert with kitchen knives and sticks. But when it came to using a weapon in combat, it was like Liddy lost control of his own hand. At this, Demoness said nothing more and began to think that Liddy's strange inability to attack wasn't going to change anytime soon. He wished he could nurture Liddy enough to help him overcome this naturally, but they simply didn't have the time. Demoness told Liddy it was fine if he couldn't attack. The important thing was for him to improve his ability to protect himself. Then, Demoness gave Liddy a ring. Liddy curiously asked what it was, and Demoness replied that Liddy could wear it with his gloves on, just by putting it on his finger. Demoness explained that whenever Liddy wanted to protect himself or someone else from danger, the mana in the ring would help him. Liddy was surprised and asked if it was a magic item, saying he couldn't possibly accept it. Demoness insisted that Liddy should take it, as the ring was specially crafted for him. Liddy asked, surprised, "For me?" Demoness replied that dwarves are natural-born blacksmiths, and while he might be an exception for choosing to go adventuring from a young age, he was still a dwarf. Therefore, even though he wasn't the best dwarf at the craft, he had poured all of his smithing skills into this ring for Liddy. Liddy, moved and overjoyed, hugged Demoness tightly, saying he was so happy and would treasure the ring for the rest of his life. Demoness praised him, saying that was very good. Meanwhile, Veronica watched this scene and wondered if there was really any mana in the ring. But she couldn't feel anything from it, wondering if she just wasn't skilled enough to sense it. After that, the group continued deeper into the dungeon without any major problems. They fought many types of monsters and easily defeated them thanks to Demoness's support. Upon reaching a certain area, Yido confidently declared that there was no mistaking it. This was the Drakeling's lair. Demoness responded, saying that everyone was ready and signaled for them to enter. When Liddy stepped inside, he was surprised to see a tiny winged drake. Veronica, on the other hand, was delighted to see the Drakeling, exclaiming how cute it was. She cried out that she never expected Drakelings to be such small, pretty creatures, and stepped closer to it. Yido immediately shouted for Veronica to stay away, reminding her that it was still a monster. He wondered how such a young Drakeling could have gotten so deep inside the dungeon. Demoness answered that he thought the room's ceiling was quite high, so perhaps the Drakeling had fallen from above. Yido looked up and, noticing there was no hole in the ceiling, asked where it could have fallen from. Liddy replied that if a dungeon structure is damaged, it automatically repairs itself over time using mana. So that means the Drakeling was most likely injured while flying and fell through the ceiling. Then, the hole in the ceiling automatically healed before the Drakeling could fly again, trapping it here. Liddy realized its wing was pierced and it would probably be some time before the Drakeling could fly on its own. Veronica then asked if the little Drakeling's cries were the reason the winged drakes had attacked the village. If so, she wondered if they were planning to kill it. Demoness replied that actually that would be the easiest way to solve their problem. He then turned to Liddy and asked for his opinion on the matter. Liddy answered that, in his earliest memory, he was already an orphan and didn't even know what his parents looked like. He added that this Drakeling definitely still had a chance, and if they could reunite it with its parents, the problem would be solved, right? Demoness replied that he knew Liddy would choose that option. Liddy happily agreed to take on all the work. Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoed from the ceiling, and everyone looked up in confusion. Unexpectedly, a winged drake burst through the ceiling, shattering the stone. Seeing the winged drake, Ito and Veronica tensed up, while Demoness wondered where these scaled dragons came from, and if they were the little one's parents. The winged drake blocked the exit, letting out a powerful roar. Liddy watched as the dragon braced itself, blocking their escape. Demoness yelled for Liddy to keep Princess Veronica safe. Liddy replied with a right, assuring Demoness he could do it. Demoness declared he would paralyze the winged drake and charged forward to attack. But as he brought his strike down, he realized it hadn't left a single scratch on the dragon's body. Demoness wondered if its skill was just too powerful. This time, the winged drake swung its tail, slamming it into Demoness, throwing him against the wall with a loud crash. Seeing Demoness hurt, both Liddy and Veronica grew tense. The winged drake then turned its hostile gaze towards Liddy and Veronica. Seeing this, a tense Ito told Veronica it was time to use her magic. But then he suddenly remembered and shouted that she couldn't, or they'd be buried alive. The winged drake roared again, making Ito even more tense. Meanwhile, Liddy was lost in thought, wondering what he could possibly do to get them out of this situation. Liddy thought that if only he were as strong as Mr. Demoness, he could defeat the winged drake himself. Suddenly, Liddy heard Demoness's voice ring out, telling him to use the ring. Seeing Demoness completely fine and unharmed, Ito asked in surprise how he didn't have a single scratch on him. At that moment, Liddy realized that while he might be useless at attacking, with this ring he could protect what was important to him. Demoness told Liddy he would guide him on how to use the ring, and that he should listen carefully. Liddy replied, "Okay." Both Ito and Veronica were excited, thinking about the magic ring crafted by a warrior from the hero's party, wondering what it could do. Ito guessed that if it were just a normal magic ring, it might only enhance defense. However, since it was crafted by a warrior from the hero's party, he wondered if it could create a shield as solid as rock. Demoness instructed Liddy to raise his arm to chest level and place his hand in front of him. Just then, the winged drake charged towards Liddy, making Veronica tense up. Ito was also worried because Liddy wasn't ready yet. Demoness told Liddy to protect himself. Liddy immediately thrust his hand forward, and suddenly the winged drake was thrown forcefully against the wall. Seeing this, both Veronica and Ito were stunned. Even Liddy couldn't believe his eyes, exclaiming that it was an amazing defense. Hearing that, Ito and Veronica tensed up even more. Veronica called out to Liddy, saying that no matter how she looked at it, she thought that action could be considered an attack. But Demoness cut in, insisting it was a perfect defense. Liddy explained that he had simply pushed back the attacker, a very basic defensive move. He cheerfully said that the defense skill Mr. Demoness taught him was really powerful. Ito cut in, saying he didn't think it worked that way. Liddy then thanked Demoness again for the ring he'd made for him. Demoness explained that the ring didn't actually have any mana inside it. Liddy asked again in surprise, and Demoness shared that this had been troubling him for a long time. How to teach Liddy to protect himself when he couldn't hold a weapon? And this was the answer he came up with. If Liddy couldn't attack, then they had to add a new weapon to his defense, a very powerful one. Demoness also explained that every time Liddy defended himself, he was unconsciously holding back his strength. So he gave Liddy the ring to encourage him to use his full power, and the result was clear. It was a perfect defense. Or you could even say it went beyond the realm of defense. Liddy could even call it his new ability, Extreme Super Defense. In the end, Liddy acquired the ultimate defense sub-skill. Demoness told Liddy that he had passed the test and was now a true warrior. Hearing that, Liddy was overjoyed and thanked Demoness. Liddy ran to Demoness, throwing his arms around him, jumping up and wrapping himself around him with all his might. Demoness had to brace himself to keep from being knocked backward by the force of the hug. Seeing this, Ito asked, "Do they have to do this every time?" Meanwhile, Veronica happily shared how happy she was for Liddy. Ito remarked that he knew the kid was no ordinary boy, but he never expected Liddy to be able to smash a giant winged drake into a wall with his bare hands the moment he learned how to attack. Liddy protested, saying it wasn't an attack. He was just defending himself. Demoness disagreed, claiming it was a fantastic defense. Ito, feeling stressed, reluctantly replied, "All right, whatever you two say." Suddenly, the drakeling started crying again, which made Ito remember, and he said they'd almost forgotten about the little drakeling. Veronica added that they still needed to return the drakeling to its nest. Ito nervously approached the winged drake, saying that they had defeated the parent drake, which was supposed to take the drakeling back. Yido tapped the drake's body lightly to see if it was still alive. After being attacked by Liddy, the winged drake suddenly opened its eyes, making Yido tense up and scramble away, shouting for everyone to be careful because the drake was still alive. Yido also pointed out that the drake had no injuries and asked Liddy to hit it one more time. Liddy protested, saying it was just a defensive move. This surprised everyone as the winged drake simply took the drakeling in its mouth and flew away. Seeing this, Liddy asked if the drake had escaped. Demoness said no, stating that he didn't think so. After taking flight, the winged drake began to roar in pain. Hearing this cry, Liddy felt confused and wondered if the drake had just screamed. Veronica replied, suggesting the winged drake was probably very angry. Just then, Yido spoke up, saying that it wasn't just a normal scream. Veronica curiously asked if Yido could understand it. Yido then told everyone to think carefully, reminding them that the drakeling's cries had drawn a group of winged drakes to the village, and what would happen next when the big one did the same as before. Trying to call its flock down to attack them, someone anxiously asked about the situation. Yido shouted nervously that at least a few dozen winged drakes were heading their way. Then, Yido yelled that there might be even more, as if a whole swarm of winged drakes was rushing toward Mount Xavier. Veronica worriedly asked what they should do, and Yido replied that he thought they would be fine, since Demoness and Liddy were with them. However, he couldn't say the same for the people hiding in the village. Hearing that, Veronica panicked and said that was horrible. She urged Demoness and Liddy to do something, suggesting that if they acted quickly, they could at least minimize the damage. But when Veronica and Yido looked at Demoness and Liddy, they were stunned to see the two of them casually discussing drinking tea. Yido yelled in frustration, asking what they were doing, and Liddy replied that tea from howl flowers is good for warming up the throat. Hearing that, Yido furiously shouted that nobody cared about warming their throats when the village was about to be attacked. Demoness then reassured them, saying not to worry. He had already instructed Liddy on what needed to be done, so his role as a teacher was over. Now it was time for him to return to his role as a warrior, and this warrior shines brightest when facing overwhelming numbers, just like the winged drakes attacking the village. The villagers were terrified as they saw the swarm of winged drakes swooping in to attack again. The elders hurriedly ordered everyone to evacuate, especially the women and children. Suddenly, the mutated winged drake spotted Demoness standing on a hill, and one of them roared, signaling the others to attack him. Demoness stood firm against the winged drakes, and when Veronica saw this, she anxiously exclaimed about the enormous number of winged drakes. Yido, also tense, turned to Liddy and asked if Demoness would be okay facing them all alone. Liddy smiled and replied that Demoness would be fine. Suddenly, Demoness stood motionless, his body contorting into a strange shape. Liddy then expressed her concern that they were too close to Demoness while he was fighting. Immediately after, a roar erupted from Demoness. It was a very strange cry, which was actually his level 88 combat skill called War Cry. This sound stunned the flock of winged drakes, and both Yido and Veronica were amazed by it. The entire village also trembled from the sound. Yido, stressed, shouted, asking what the hell that was because his ears were ringing, while Veronica exclaimed in amazement that it was incredible, as the flock of winged drakes had started to fly away. Suddenly, Veronica noticed something and told everyone to look up, as a drakeling was falling. Seeing this, a stressed Yido asked if Demoness's roar had knocked the drakeling unconscious. He yelled that the drakeling would crash if it kept falling. Everyone panicked, and in the midst of the chaos, Liddy slid down the mountainside to catch the falling drakeling. After catching the drakeling, Liddy said cheerfully that it was a really close call, and he was so glad he managed to save it in time. Yido was impressed to see Liddy had reached the foot of the mountain in the blink of an eye. He'd never seen the boy move so fast. But suddenly Yido saw something, and urgently shouted for Liddy to look behind him. When Liddy turned around, the mutated winged drake was charging at him, roaring. But to everyone's surprise, it simply picked up the drakeling in its mouth and flew away without doing anything else. Liddy smiled at the sight, and he and the winged drake made eye contact. Afterwards, the winged drake flew off without any further commotion. Yido, still surprised and confused, asked what just happened. Demoness explained that the drakeling's father was a variant, a monster that had evolved to be stronger than its peers. Its superior intelligence must have helped it understand that Liddy had just saved its child's life. Liddy approached and asked if everything was all right. Yido was stunned, realizing that Liddy had returned in just a few seconds. Demoness continued, saying that the drakeling had returned to its flock, so they wouldn't have to worry about attacks from the winged drakes anymore, at least for the time being. Liddy asked what that meant, and Demoness replied that it meant they had accomplished their goal. Liddy, Yido, and Veronica began to celebrate. The scene shifts to a few minutes later. As the village chief, Relic, announced that as the village chief, he wanted to express his deepest gratitude to Demoness and his friends for saving the village from the winged drake's attack. Relic began to tear up, saying he couldn't believe it, and that the troublemaking kid from before had truly grown up and become a reliable adult after leaving the village. Liddy curiously asked Demoness who the old man was. Demoness replied that, as Liddy had heard, he was the village chief. Demoness then told Relic he was too old to be crying. Yido, surprised, told Demoness that he thought the chief and Demoness looked exactly alike. Suddenly, a little girl ran up to hug Veronica and thank her for saving them. Veronica shyly replied that she didn't think she did anything that great. The little girl happily said that her mom told her she could play outside again, and it was all thanks to Veronica. Veronica smiled, patting the little girl's head and telling her to have fun playing, but reminding her to be careful. The next day, as Liddy and Veronica were preparing to leave, Demoness asked if they were leaving already. Liddy confirmed and then thanked Demoness for everything, especially for teaching him self-defense and for the ring. Demoness smiled and said there was no need for thanks, that in fact he was the one who should be thanking all of them. Demoness thanked everyone, expressing his gratitude for helping him protect the village. He continued, saying that if they ever needed him, they just had to call his name, and no matter where they were, he would stop at nothing to help. As they all left, Demoness said it was time for Ignore to stop hiding behind that tree. Hearing this, Ignore stepped out in surprise, asking if Demoness really knew, and that she had thought it would be fun to surprise him for once. Ignore explained that she was using an invisibility spell, so Liddy and the others couldn't have noticed her. Demoness, with a calm expression, said he could feel her presence from a mile away. Ignore, stressed, asked what presence Demoness was talking about and shouted at him to stop talking nonsense and explain himself. She also said that she had just said her goodbyes to the other three not long ago, and meeting them again so soon would be bad for her image, especially since it was just her with her reserve mana. Hearing this, Demoness remarked that mana projection was a high-level spell, so she must have had something important to say if she used it. Ignore admitted that she needed his help as a member of the team. Demoness curiously asked what she needed help with. Ignore shared that a demonic cyclone was fast approaching, and it was something she couldn't dispel on her own. She also said she didn't want to involve the kids because it was too dangerous. So, after this, she planned to meet up with Farah and Rozark to reform the heroes' party. The scene shifts to Xanamund, who had finally approached Liddy and Veronica. He apologized for being late, but asserted that they didn't need to worry because he had sworn to take her life with his own hands. The scene shifts back to Liddy, who was carrying a strange girl on his back. The girl laughed and said it was fun to mess around on his shoulders. Liddy asked her to hold on tight and to let him know if she felt tired. The girl nodded and replied that she thought he was very kind. Liddy responded that he was just doing what anyone would do in a situation. The girl then apologized to Veronica, saying it was a shame she had to walk since she had taken Veronica's spot. Veronica smiled, telling the little girl not to worry, since she was injured after all. The girl was surprised, praised Veronica for being so kind, and said she'd happily accept the offer. She cheerfully told Liddy to keep going. Liddy smiled and replied that he wasn't a horse. The girl's name was Mia, and Liddy and his group had found her with an injured leg. It turned out that Mia had just escaped a monster ambush, barely making it out alive. She shared that she was on her way to visit her grandmother. Hearing that, Veronica felt so sorry for her. Mia replied that she knew it was terrible, but everything was okay now, and she'd have a much more enjoyable trip thanks to them being with her. Liddy agreed, saying they'd get her to safety since they were headed that way anyway. Mia laughed and said it sounded like Liddy was calling her some kind of quest item. At this point, Yido was thinking that to get to Hansville, one would have to climb over an entire mountain. Yet a little girl like Mia was daring to make the journey alone, which made him feel something was suspicious. They couldn't be too careless, especially since the enemy had sent a noble assassin to attack them before. Suddenly, Yido realized that Veronica also seemed tense, so he asked if she thought so too. Veronica responded by asking if he thought so, noting that Mia seemed to be clinging a little too closely to Liddy. She added that she didn't really mind, but Liddy might feel uncomfortable. Yido caught on and teased Veronica, telling her she was just jealous and now she was really growing up, wasn't she? Veronica embarrassedly shouted that it wasn't like that at all. Mia and Liddy looked over at Veronica, and she just smiled, waving as if to say it was nothing. Liddy then said that they had walked quite a distance, so they should stop to rest and eat. When he opened his bag and saw the remaining fruit, he realized they were running low. Liddy then asked Mia if she minded helping him gather more fruit from the surrounding trees. but Ito interrupted and asked Liddy if he wanted some help. Liddy smiled and thanked Ito for the offer, but he thought he and Mia would be fine without any help. As Liddy gave a thumbs up, Ito felt tense because he didn't want Liddy to get into trouble. As they headed into the forest to find fruit, Mia waved goodbye and reminded them to be careful with their belongings. Meanwhile, Veronica thought nervously, wondering if Liddy really wanted to go with Mia that badly. At this point, Ito thought that Liddy also seemed to realize something was off with Mia, and he hoped Liddy would protect himself, because they still didn't know how dangerous Mia could be. Once in the forest, Liddy suggested to Mia that they should split up to look for fruit, and only pick the ones that looked tasty. Mia replied in agreement. Just then, Mia and Liddy approached a cliff, and Mia asked Liddy to look over the side because she saw something there. Liddy walked over, looked down, and asked her what she saw. Suddenly, Mia pushed him into the deep pit, thanking him for taking care of her and saying goodbye. After throwing Liddy into the pit, she was overjoyed and laughed out loud, savoring the moment. She figured he must have been the princess's protector, and thought that peace must have made them all lose their minds. At first, Mia had even been wary of Liddy, but now she felt he wasn't anything to worry about. She felt truly relieved, thinking that now only she was left to worry about the princess, since Veronica's bodyguard was done for. However, unexpectedly, Liddy reappeared on the cliff. Mia asked in surprise how Liddy managed to climb back up. Liddy laughed and told her not to worry, he'd explain. Liddy explained that first he had stabbed a tree branch into the cliff face as he fell, then used the momentum from the fall to propel himself back up. Hearing this, Mia was stunned, yelling that he must be kidding. She asked if he was even human, wondering why he would carry such a ridiculous tree branch. Liddy explained that Rosark had once told him it's an adventurer's duty to help anyone in need. An adventurer who ignores travelers in distress will never get any requests. But not everyone you meet on the road is an innocent traveler. Sometimes they might just be trying to trick you, or some might even try to stab you in the back while you're asleep. Farah smiled and asked if Rosark was speaking from his experience with women. Rosark grimaced and said yes, like that time with Anya from the guild, when he actually thought she liked him. However, that doesn't mean Liddy should get to pick and choose who deserves his help. A true adventurer always prepares for the worst, so even if things go wrong, they'll find a way to handle it. Back in the present, Liddy shared that he had suspected her from the moment they met, so he had prepared for any situation. This made Mia furious. Liddy then asked Mia why she wanted to kill Princess Veronica. Mia angrily retorted, asking if he really wanted to know the reason. Suddenly, the air around her changed, making Liddy suspicious. Mia transformed into a monster and screamed that if he couldn't guess the reason, then peace must have rotted his tiny brain. Liddy, stunned, asked if Mia was a demon and how that could be possible since the Demon King was supposed to have died long ago. Mia didn't answer. Instead, she attacked Liddy directly with a punch. Liddy was thrown towards the pit again, but to Mia's astonishment, he pulled out a rope and threw it towards a branch, securing it tightly. Seeing this, a shocked and tense Mia asked, "What the hell is this?" Liddy used his support skill called Lasso to climb up. Mia was absolutely furious with Liddy and cursed him for being a stubborn brat. She screamed that it didn't matter because she would make sure he died twice over before she was done with him. Hearing strange sounds coming from the forest where Liddy and Mia had gone, Veronica nervously asked what that was and if something had happened to Liddy. Ito replied that he didn't know, but they needed to stay alert because something might be approaching. Internally, Ito felt his suspicions had been right and wondered if Liddy was okay. Suddenly, Ito saw something falling from the sky, and as it landed in a hurry, he was shocked to see it was Liddy. Both Ito and Veronica stared at Liddy, tense and confused. At that moment, Liddy yelled for everyone to be careful because Mia was after Veronica's life. Just then, Mia appeared and attacked Veronica, but Liddy lunged, grabbed her, and started running to evade the blow. Afterward, everyone stood facing each other. Veronica was still confused, while Ito stared at Mia, stunned, and asked if it was really her, and what the hell had happened to her. Liddy replied that Mia was a demon. Hearing this, Ito was stunned and shouted, "What? Why is a demon after us? How can a demon be after us when the Demon King is supposed to be dead?" Liddy replied tensely that Ito was right. It didn't make sense, since demons were supposed to have gone extinct after the Demon King was killed. Liddy explained that demons are intelligent monsters, blessed with superior magical power, and they often have human-like appearances. They receive their power from the Great Demon King. But the Great Demon King was supposed to have died after the hero defeated him, which should have made the demon race extinct. Liddy confusedly asked Mia what she was now. Mia told Liddy she didn't need to answer his question. Liddy then asserted that since Mia was targeting Veronica, he suspected the current king of Fenalicia himself was involved with the demon's survival after the demon king's fall. Hearing this, both Veronica and Yido shuddered. Yido even asked Liddy if he was joking, saying there was no way a peaceful kingdom like Fenalicia could be in league with demons. Veronica cut Yido off, saying there was already an assassination attempt, and she hadn't been able to contact anyone from the kingdom, so everything seemed to fit together. At that moment, Mia screamed that she was ordered to kill Princess Veronica, but now it looked like she would have to kill all three of them. With that, Mia charged at Liddy, who could only defend himself. Mia remarked that Liddy was a strong and difficult opponent, and asked, puzzled, why he wasn't attacking, wondering if he was hiding some kind of trump card. Inwardly, Liddy thought that Mia was incredibly strong, and they couldn't go on like this, so he knew he had to do something. He decided to endure her initial assault and wait for an opening to counterattack when she unleashed her finishing move, using his ultimate technique, ultimate defense. Just then, Mia said to Liddy that she wanted to share something with him. She said that Liddy was always going on about being a walking encyclopedia on demons, but she bet he didn't know this part. She explained that there are two ways a demon can disguise itself as a human. As Liddy continued to wait for his chance to counterattack with ultimate defense, Mia continued, saying the first way is for a demon to shapeshift its body into a human form, while the second is to transfer its consciousness into a human's body to possess it. Liddy prepared to counter with his ultimate technique, ultimate defense, when Mia suddenly declared that she was the second type of demon and that this body belonged to an innocent, poor village girl. Hearing this, Liddy froze, his attack stopping short. In his moment of distraction, Mia swiftly landed a punch on him. Both Yido and Veronica watched tensely, as Liddy lay on the ground, writhing in pain. Mia mocked Liddy, asking if he was really so soft-hearted, worrying about some stupid girl he didn't even know while fighting for his own life. She added that he was the reason Veronica was now just waiting to die. This time, Yido urged Veronica to run, saying he would try to hold Mia off for a while. But Veronica resolutely refused, insisting she had to fight by his side against Mia. Yido yelled at her again to run, but Mia laughed and asked if this was really the time for the two of them to fight her. Mia told them to just give up, saying no one could save Veronica's life, because she would hunt her down and kill her no matter what. Mia lunged at Veronica, intent on killing her, and Veronica, filled with fear, squeezed her eyes shut. But suddenly, the unexpected happened. Xanamund appeared and blocked Mia's attack. Stunned, Mia tensely asked what that was, while Yido, just as surprised, asked Xanamund what he was doing here. Xanamund replied, asking Veronica if he hadn't made it clear, stating that he had already declared her life was his to take. Mia shouted again, asking Xanamund who he was, while Yido wondered in disbelief if Xanamund had actually saved them. Xanamund answered again, stating that he had declared Veronica's life was his. Veronica was shocked, wondering if Xanamund really intended to kill her. Yido yelled at Xanamund, I don't know what you're planning, but if you really think you can take on this demon, you need to stop. Xanamund asked curiously, and why is that? Yido screamed back, because demons are absurdly strong. Their physical and magical power far surpasses that of a normal human. It's a death sentence to face one head-on, unless you're a warrior who could take on an entire hero's party. Hearing this, Xanamund replied, how interesting. Mia thanked Yido for the explanation, then told Xanamund that now that he understood how dangerous she was, he'd best run before it was too late. But in the next instant, she rushed at Xanamund, screaming that it was too late to run now and that he was going to die. Xanamund replied, confident that he would be fine. Thanks for the warning. Humans really are quite clever. Mia roared in anger, are you saying demons aren't clever? And in a rage, she lunged at Xanamund. Xanamund dodged her easily and commented, Yido was right. Your strength and speed are indeed exceptional. Mia yelled that this was no time for regrets and continued her attack. Xanamund blocked her attack with his sword, and the two began to exchange blows and parries, clashing fiercely. Yido and Veronica stood stunned, watching the intense battle. Veronica was about to speak, but before she could say anything, Liddy appeared behind them, remarking that it was a magnificent battle. Both Yido and Veronica were surprised, and a stunned Yido asked Liddy if he was really alive. Liddy replied confidently, saying that fortunately he was fine. Yido wondered how that was possible, as Liddy looked completely unscathed, asking what his body was made of. Liddy replied that he must have lost consciousness for a moment, and apologized to Veronica for putting her in danger. Veronica told him there was no need to apologize, as she was just glad he was safe. Liddy then said he didn't understand why Xanamund was fighting on their side, but if that was the case, it was for the best, so they should take this chance to run. But Yido shouted in protest, insisting that it would be best for Liddy to watch the fight unfold. Liddy asked in confusion, not understanding what Yido meant. Yido advised Liddy to recall their journey so far, pointing out that he had only lost twice. The first time was when Xanamund launched a surprise attack, and the second was when Mia caught him off guard by taking the girl's body hostage. Both times Liddy lost were due to factors other than pure combat strength. Therefore, by watching the battle between Mia and Xanamund, Liddy could learn a few tricks to overcome that weakness. Yido also said that he didn't know the reason, but the demons were trying to prevent Veronica from returning to Fenalicia, and with such an urgent situation, they needed Liddy to be as strong as possible. Liddy replied that he thought it was too dangerous. Yido thought for a moment, while on the other side, Xanamund and Mia were still fighting, exchanging blows and parries. Mia screamed at Xanamund to stop resisting, while observing everything that was happening. Veronica was amazed that Xanamund could hold Mia off for so long, and remarked that she never knew he was such a powerful swordsman. Liddy replied that it wasn't quite that, but rather that Xanamund was more skilled than he was strong. When Mia threw a punch, Xanamund didn't just block her blow with his sword, but also thrust his blade into Mia's to deflect the force of the strike, significantly reducing the impact of the attack. That's how Xanamund was able to deal with Mia on equal terms. But doing so required incredible skill and concentration. Just then, Mia yelled at Xanamund, saying that he couldn't expect to defeat her just by parrying. She added that once he ran out of stamina, she would make him realize just how pathetic he truly was. Suddenly, an explosion erupted from within Mia. Veronica asked in confusion if that was an explosion. She was also surprised to see that Xanamund had used magic without a magic circle or an incantation. Even a veteran mage would find that difficult to do in the middle of such an intense battle. But what surprised everyone even more was that Mia quickly recovered and continued her assault on Xanamund, saying that the explosion hadn't harmed her at all. Xanamund blocked Mia's attack, but this time he felt the impact and was pushed back slightly. Liddy was stunned and confused, not understanding how Mia seemed unharmed by that blow. Veronica explained that using magic without a magic circle or incantation greatly reduces its power. It seemed the spell had prevented any serious damage to Mia. She remarked that although it wasn't painful, it did make her feel hot. Just then, Mia looked up, surprised to find that Xanamund was no longer in front of her. At first, she wondered if Xanamund had run away. But deep down, Mia knew he wouldn't do that, because if he had fled, Veronica would surely be dead by now. Suddenly, a nearby tree snapped and began to fall on her. Veronica tensed up as she saw the tree falling. When Mia realized what was happening, she quickly smashed the tree into pieces before it could land. However, right after that, more trees began to snap and fall toward her. Mia asked if this was some special tactic from Xanamund. She began to fight back against the falling trees and taunted that Xanamund must have gotten scared after realizing the power gap between them. She declared that was why Xanamund had to hide among the trees, and that all these assassins were surely cowards. Suddenly, an arrow flew in and pierced Mia's hand. Mia grimaced from the pain of the arrow piercing her hand, and Liddy was surprised to realize it was a magic arrow. He immediately understood that Xanamund had been targeting her from afar. At the same time, Mia felt a sense of elation, thinking that Xanamund had made a mistake, as she could clearly see where the arrow came from. Without a second thought, she immediately charged towards Xanamund to attack. But just as she arrived, Xanamund had already created a magic circle and begun his chant. "O purgatorial Drake, manifest your scorching might upon this realm, and let your flames incinerate her flesh and blood." Immediately after, the attack dragonic blaze shot toward Mia. As it turned out, Xanamund possessed level 41 fire magic. The flames began to burn Mia. Witnessing the scene, Liddy was in awe. He realized Xanamund had intentionally used weaker magic to make Mia believe his powers weren't a real threat, causing her to lower her guard. And then, Xanamund used his full magical strength to attack her. Liddy realized that Xanamund wasn't just a skilled fighter, but also a talented mage. Meanwhile, Mia, now severely injured, thought that all hope was lost, that she couldn't move, and would probably die right there. Just then, Xanamund moved behind Mia, and seeing this, she tensed up. Xanamund told Mia that her life as a monster was over. He immediately charged at her with his sword, sending Mia into a panic. But just at that moment, Liddy stepped in and told Zannemund to stop. Hearing that, Zannemund paused. Liddy explained that Mia's body wasn't her own. It belonged to a poor village girl. If Zannemund killed her, he would be killing an innocent girl. Zannemund replied, his voice full of anger, agreeing and asking Liddy what else he wanted. Seeing that attitude, Liddy shuddered. Zannemund said that he could tell Liddy had an exceptionally kind heart. However, that very excessive kindness was the reason Liddy couldn't protect the princess. Hearing this, Yido thought that Zannemund was right. Unlike Liddy, Zannemund was a seasoned assassin with extensive combat experience, while Liddy had his kind heart, and Zannemund had nothing of the sort. While they were talking, Mia was trying to recover her strength and heal her wounds. Zannemund then asked Liddy if he knew that when a monster possesses a human body, that body is already dead. Zannemund explained that Mia was a mimicry-type monster, which meant Liddy had completely fallen for the monster's lies. Hearing this, Liddy fell silent. But Yido immediately retorted, saying Zannemund only understood that because it was already too late. Unlike Zannemund, they couldn't just easily strike Mia down when they had the chance, because that girl was still inside the body. Zannemund asked back, what if Mia was just trying to persuade them out of concern? If this monster were merely a parasite, it would have taken over the body from the start, wouldn't it? Zannemund shared that he was certain Mia was lying. Zannemund also told Liddy that he believed Liddy was too naive, both as a person and as a warrior. Furthermore, Zannemund reminded Liddy that he was just a porter, so he should know his place. Yido yelled, asking what was going on and why Liddy was getting lectured by the enemy. Zannemund ordered Yido to be silent, which surprised Yido. But right after, Yido noticed Mia trying to get up. Suddenly, Mia jumped up and threw a piece of rock towards Zannemund, but he easily blocked it with his hand. Mia then charged forward to attack, prompting Zannemund to ready his defense. But to everyone's surprise, Mia wasn't aiming for Zannemund. Instead, she ran straight for Veronica. Mia told Zannemund that she would kill him another day, but right now, she was only there to take Princess Veronica's life. Seeing this, both Veronica and Yido were terrified. Zannemund wondered if this was all Mia could do, seeing as he had plenty of time to cast a spell. Suddenly, he saw Liddy step up to stand in front of Veronica to protect her. Mia then asked Liddy if he was ready to die, but this time Liddy activated Supreme Defense, knocking Mia back, causing her to crash into the trees and disappear into the distance. Seeing this, Yido and Veronica were overjoyed. Liddy then said that he couldn't deny it. His naivety made him weak, and perhaps he was still just a porter, which was why he would continue to learn. He wanted to become the world's greatest adventurer as soon as possible, just like a hero. Liddy also said that adventurers need to view things with a certain coldness and make objective judgments. Then, Liddy approached Zannemund and said that he had learned a lot from him. Thank you for the valuable information. Zannemund didn't answer, but Yido yelled at Liddy, knowing he was a polite person, and asked if he'd forgotten something. Liddy, surprised, asked what it was. Yido screamed that Zannemund was an assassin who had come to kill Veronica. Liddy replied that he needed to learn from his enemies, as he was lacking in many ways. Hearing this, Yido yelled, saying Liddy's observational skills were incredible. However, Yido continued to shout, stressing that this was no time for jokes, because now the hateful monster had been eliminated, but Zannemund was approaching them. As Zannemund walked towards them, everyone stood still, tense. But to their surprise, Zannemund knelt before them and told Veronica that he had come to get her. The scene shifts to some time later with Liddy and Veronica cooking. Zannemund arrived and said he couldn't find the monster anymore, that it had probably fled. Veronica, surprised, asked if Mia could have escaped even when so gravely injured. Zannemund replied that it should have been a fatal wound, but he thought that monster had extraordinary vitality. Meanwhile, Liddy handed Zannemund a bowl of Morituri soup. After finishing it, Zannemund commented that the soup was delicious and thought Liddy would make a pretty good cook. Liddy responded with a nod, but added that the soup wasn't good at all. Yido chimed in, saying that wasn't much of a compliment. Veronica then asked Zannemund if he could explain everything to them. Zannemund answered that what he was about to share was for the princess's ears only, which was why he had tried to eliminate Liddy earlier. However, since Liddy seemed to be at least trustworthy, he decided he would speak with him present. Yido angrily yelled at Zannemund, reminding him that he had nearly killed them earlier, and asked if he could show at least a little remorse. Zannemund then shared that he came from the barony of Erdesh, and belonged to a family that specialized in hunting down those who opposed the royal family. He explained that even now, assassination makes up the bulk of their work, and many people call him the noble assassin. One day, the royal family summoned him to the throne room. The scene shifts to the past, showing Zanamund entering the throne room. Upon entering, he was surprised to see a stranger and wondered who that person was and why they were sitting on the throne, as if it belonged to them. At that moment, Flera stood up and told Zanamund that she was ordering him to kill the first princess, Veronica. Hearing this, Mac laughed and asked Zanamund if he was surprised that one princess was asking him to kill another. Zanamund replied that he was the shadow of the royal family and did not carry superfluous emotions. Flera praised his words and handed him a letter. Looking at the letter, Zanamund asked what it was. Flera replied that it was a travel permit, explaining that Princess Veronica was currently in Thikar, so he needed to get there quickly. Flera also mentioned that if Veronica chose to stay in Thikar, that was fine, but if she tried to leave Thikar to return to Fenalicia, he must kill her immediately. The scene returns to the present, with Veronica asking in surprise if Flera had really ordered her death. Zanamund remained silent, not answering. Veronica then shouted that it was foolishness, insisting that Zanamund must have misunderstood or was lying. Zanamund replied that perhaps Veronica was just being too confident about it. But killing the first princess would bring Flera closer to the throne, and he believed that was motive enough. He also said that both Flera and Veronica hadn't seen each other for 5 years, and that human relationships are fragile things. Veronica screamed that it was absolutely impossible. Hearing this, Zanamund smiled and said that Veronica was more stubborn than she looked, and also quite naive. He said that he believed that was a problematic trait for the leader of a nation to possess. Suddenly, Zanamund pulled out the letter and told Veronica that she was right. Veronica looked curiously at the letter and asked what it was. Zanamund replied that it was a letter from Princess Flera, enclosed with his travel permit. In the letter, Flera wrote that she would entrust the truth to the royal count, as the palace had fallen into demonic hands. She said that a monster disguised as a human had killed the king. Flera warned that if the first princess returned to Fenalicia, she would be killed or turned into a puppet. The letter showed that Flera was trying to become queen without a fight, by marrying the princess. Therefore, assassinating the first princess was not Zanamund's real mission. Instead, he would pretend to assassinate Veronica while helping her escape from the monster's grasp. After listening, Liddy deduced that Flera was trying to protect Veronica. Yido then asked if Flera intended to sacrifice herself. Model. Zanamund replied with a yes, confirming it was correct. As all eyes turned to Veronica, she was crying. Liddy worriedly asked what was wrong. Veronica started to wail through her tears, confessing that she had failed. As the older sister, Veronica recounted that she had selfishly decided to study abroad, and because of that, she wasn't in Fenalicia when it mattered most. And yet, Flera had even sacrificed herself to protect Veronica. Hearing this, Zanamund was surprised by their beautiful sisterly bond. However, he had already arranged everything to hide her away. Zanamund then asked if they should get going, but Veronica screamed, "No!" She said she had to return to Fenalicia and save Flera.